And good Monday morning, everybody. Welcome to the Fox 10 News Now stream. My name is Mike Pace. Happy to be here with you this morning. We'll be having a lot of news to cover here this morning. So happy to be here with you. I just want to get you set up here on some of the latest that we will be following for you, including everybody's been talking about it, the Valley storm update that happened yesterday. It was fast rolling. I couldn't believe, I live in near Old Town Scottsdale, and I couldn't believe the lightning and thunder that we were getting yesterday. It was really something. Got a little bit of rain, but more of just hearing that rolling thunder. So a lot of storm damage out on the West Valley, so we will be showcasing you those updates this morning. And then coming up this week, big talker, the Clinton Benghazi hearing. It's happening on Thursday, and we will have a preview for you on that one. You're not going to want to miss that. And then also Boy Scouts rescued a hiker over the weekend in Massachusetts, so that we'll have that uplifting story for you. And then also a blind woman haunted house. Yes, a blind woman goes through a haunted house, and she's not there. Obviously, she can't see the attractions, but she can feel them. So we have that story for you as well. And then, boy, Arizona letdown for the football game yesterday. It was looking good, and then all of a sudden, the everything unraveled there. So we'll have an update for you and see what they can do to bounce back come next Monday on Monday Night Football. But first, let's get into the weather. Everybody's talking about the weather since it happened yesterday and caused some damages in the valley. Get you that update right now.
Step out on the patio and maybe
light up a cigar.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh, well, I know what your routine is.
But it was raining so hard, I said, no, I think I'll just go to bed.
Yeah.
Rain, hail, strong winds. It really was just crazy storm, and that storm left a lot of damage behind.
The damage is unreal in some parts of the valley. Troy Barrett is up in Skyfox this morning checking out some of that damage right around 51st Avenue and Camelback. Right, Troy?
That's right. We're right around 51st Avenue and Camelback. This whole area, we were up last night flying in the storm and getting some damage video. And this whole area was without power last night. Just a big, huge, dark hole. But one of the most striking parts of the damage that we're seeing this morning is this cotton storage facility that's right here, just a little bit north of the Maryvale Hospital. And I'll give you a quick scan of all the damage. There are a little bit more than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings that have just been either damaged or annihilated completely. You can see as we zoom in that the storage facilities, the roofs have been ripped off, even the steel inside that holds up those structures are bent and torn down, and the tin and the aluminum that's on the outside of these buildings just thrown everywhere for about a half a mile, all the way from sort of east to west across this area. And we can see those crews off in the distance on 51st Avenue. They're hard at work getting those power poles back. There's one here at the end of all this damage from these cotton storage facilities, just snapped in half, and you can see it just hanging right there. And just a little bit to the south, we have even more poles down. Crews working hard to get this taken care of, but this is some of the most impressive damage that we have seen here this morning. More than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings damaged or destroyed.
I don't think I've ever seen damage like that before on any storm of that widespread.
Not here in the valley, at least.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've seen this a couple of times, say down around Eloy, where they get some very strong microbursts at those cotton storage facilities down there, but I've never seen anything like this, at least this widespread and just so much damage in one area in the middle of town. This is just incredible to see.
Yeah.
Obliterated.
And no reports of anybody being injured or anything that we know of, I guess, huh, Troy? Well, perhaps Troy didn't hear us. Okay, Troy.
No injuries, at least at this point, that we're hearing about, but certainly the way that this aluminum and tin gets thrown around, it could have easily hurt someone or even killed someone as far.
Yeah, so let me just drag this down here for you guys. But here's just some more aerials that we were able to capture. 51st Avenue and Camelback area with just extensive damage that happened yesterday. So we'll be following this weather situation very closely. Do have an update for you on the weather that we could be expecting today and the rest of the week. For that, we go to Corey.
Light up a cigar.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh, well, I know what your routine is.
But it was raining so hard, I said, no, I think
Whoops.
Forecast with Corey McCloskey on Fox 10 News.
Good morning, all, and welcome to your weather world. Here it is, a Monday after a very, very big weather weekend. We're clearing things out pretty well across the state, so the major trouble has now pushed itself off to the east and has diminished considerably in its intensity. Although here during the early hours, while you were still asleep, but I was awake, we still had the showers on the move. They've now pretty much lessened in their intensity, and they'll continue to push their way eastward. And we're left with some very foggy conditions out there. It is thick. Now you can still see, but wait till you see the image from the tower cam. It's pretty impressive. So here's the way we look as far as our rainfall totals go. Once you get into this deep green area, you see here, that puts you definitely in the around the 1 inch range. So there was lots of that going on. These showers were intense, thunderstorms, I should say, some hail in there as well. And it was widespread. Almost the entire valley picked up rain. Folks out here in Surprise didn't see much. Some light rain along the 303, about 1/10 of an inch there. But boy, you get into these green areas. I covered almost everybody within the metro region. So again, lots to go around. It pushed all the way up here along the 101. This is the 101 and the 51 juncture there, just east of Deer Valley Airport. And then down from the 10 south and eastward, east of Maricopa, some pretty good rain too. So that's kind of the way yesterday went. Now today is going to be a bit quieter, although we'll see some cloudy skies. I think most of the heavy rain is gone for now. A chance for it to pick up again this afternoon as things will start warming up a little bit. But look at this. Boom. And the reason for it, the temperature is 70 degrees. The dew point, though, is 67, so it's very thick. What that means is if the dew point gets close to the actual temperature, that means you're going to get some foggy conditions. The dew point is the number at which the atmosphere will be completely, or will be saturated, I should say. And so that's why our relative humidity is 90%. And look how foggy it is out there. It's so pretty. We love to see that. Don't get it very often, but we'll take it. So that means there's certainly enough moisture in the atmosphere that it won't take too much extra warmth this afternoon to perhaps kick off some additional showers. So we'll keep that chance for rain in the forecast for today. We'll call it 85 degrees tonight. We fall into the mid-60s with that possibility of rain continuing tonight into tomorrow and Wednesday too. Man, Wednesday's high, maybe just the upper 70s. So we're in for a bit of a cool stretch too. Once we get to Thursday and beyond, things will clear out a bit. Temps will warm up somewhat, but we'll be able to keep our numbers generally where they ought to be for this time of the year. So Corey's hitting the road today out to Hoonerville. I don't know if we'll catch the mayor running. I don't know if Mayor Hoon is actually.
I think he had some speaking engagements.
Probably
scheduled.
so. He's on the rubber chicken circuit. He lunches with the Seroptimists, but doesn't eat everything. Only eats the salad.
Right.
Then he heads over to the Kiwanis, where he might have the chicken there.
Maybe.
Hey everyone, we're here off 51st Avenue in Missouri at Calcott Warehouse, where it's a cotton warehouse. They store cotton here. And look at the devastation from last night's storm. You can see sheet metal everywhere, wood, nails. 37 warehouses were damaged, but 17 of them were destroyed here. And what you're looking at is what used to be a warehouse. Now, I was speaking to one of the workers. He says it happened around 7:30 last night. Nobody was here. There was no injuries, so that's the good news. They do have bales of cotton that are damaged right now, but he says they do think that those can be rescued. They just have to let the water seep out of the cotton. They ship cotton all over the world, and luckily a lot of their cotton has already been shipped. So really the main issue here is all the warehouses cars that now look like just a bunch of debris here. So we have some forklifts out here. They've started the cleanup process. I'm told they do have insurance. So a lot of work to be done, but they said that they are going to rebuild even stronger. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Courtney, for that. Just crazy to see that damage there. Wow, so they'll be looking to see if that was truly indeed a microburst. We'll update you if we hear anything about that situation over there at 51st Avenue in Camelback. Wow, haven't seen that kind of damage though in a while there. That's more kind of storm damage you would see out there like in the Midwest. So very different to see, and especially in the middle of October. So here's what we got coming up for you on Fox 10 News Now. In about a half an hour, we are going to hear from the FAA on some new drone regulations that could soon be coming out. Possibly, you may have to register new drones. So that could be an interesting development because, as we know, drones are becoming one of the hottest holiday gifts to give someone. So, especially if you have a teenager or young adults, put a nice GoPro on there and let them have at it. But there's going to be some new regulations, so we're going to hear about that in about a half an hour. But I do want to show you earlier today, President Obama was speaking at the White House during a CEO roundtable.
Decades, our addiction to fossil fuels, to imported oil, I think not only threatened our planet and our security, but also our economy. And what we've been able to do over the last 7 years is, even as we've attained #1 status in the production of oil and gas, what we've also been able to do is to slowly begin the transition of our economy to a cleaner, smarter approach to using energy. And many of the companies sitting around here have been at the forefront of that process. We have now doubled our production of clean energy. We've been reducing our carbon footprint even as the economy grows. And this progress isn't just creating a safer planet, it's also creating jobs, it's creating business opportunities, and it's something that customers are increasingly looking for. Thanks in part to the investments that we've made, there are already parts of America where clean power is actually not only competitive, but in some cases cheaper than traditional sources of energy. We have seen, for example, companies like Walmart install on-site solar capacity more actively than just about any other company. We've seen Google become the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world, with companies like Apple and Costco close behind. Today, the CEOs around this table who have already done extraordinary work are determined to go even further. Right now, we've got 81 companies who've signed on to what we're calling the American Business Act on climate change. They operate in all 50 states. They've got about 9 million employees collectively, and about $5 trillion worth of market cap. These are some of the cutting-edge, most extraordinary businesses that we have. But it's not just the big companies that are getting involved, it's their suppliers and small businesses that are also getting involved and saying, #1, we need a strong outcome in Paris as we go for the climate summit there. And #2, we need to have a partnership between business and the federal government, state government, local government, non-for-profit sector, all to continue to achieve aggressive reductions in our carbon footprint here in the United States as America as a leader. And all told right now, the commitments that these companies are making total at least $160 billion. It ranges from reducing emissions to reducing water usage to pursuing zero net deforestation to purchasing 100% clean energy. Represented around this table, we've got companies as diverse as Intel, which is obviously one of our leading high-tech innovators, and chip manufacturers and inventors. They're not only are they doing the right thing in the production of their products, but they're also facilitating, along with some of their suppliers, the ability for us to pursue the data that we need for companies to become even more energy efficient. We've got big utilities like PG&E that have been at the forefront of making it economical for customers to get clean energy. And one of the things that we discussed is the importance of us getting a smarter grid and transmission so that we are able to work to get energy from one part of the country to another part of the country in an efficient way that doesn't have a lot of leakage, but can end up really feeding an increasing demand on the part of customers for clean energy. We've got chocolate companies that are doing the right thing in terms of how they are getting their inputs, and farmers who are doing a wonderful job in California and recognizing in light of changing temperature what they need to do to be much more energy and environmentally conscious. And big companies like Berkshire Hathaway that across a whole range of industries are starting to get involved. So the bottom line is this. We have to do something about climate change because not only is it going to have an impact on our children and our grandchildren, and we have a moral obligation to leave them a planet that is as wonderful as the one that we inherited from our forebears. But it's really important for America's bottom line and economic growth that we do something about climate change. If we are at the forefront of this, if we are the innovators, if we are the early adapters, if we are the example setters, then we're the ones who are going to be creating and selling the products and services that help the entire world adapt to a clean energy future. If we are lagging behind, it's not going to happen. And so as we look at this major conference that we're going to be having in Paris in just a few months, where we've already mobilized the international community, including China, to participate. I just want everybody to understand that American businesses want this to happen as well. What they do need is certainty. It's going to be very hard for them to operate if they don't know what the rules of the road are. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody is on a fair playing field. Everybody is doing their part to make sure that we're saving this planet. If we're able to establish those kinds of rules, and that's the goal that we're setting forth in Paris, I have no doubt that these companies are going to excel, and that's going to mean jobs, businesses, and opportunity alongside cleaner air and a better environment. So I'm very grateful to all of you for participating, and I'm looking forward to getting even more companies on board in the months and years to come. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. We're talking about climate change, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that pales in comparison to some of the the survival of the planet.
All right, so we will dip out of that coverage there, but you did see President Obama a little bit earlier at a roundtable discussion at the White House. So that is the very latest. But that will get you caught up in about 2 minutes on the latest headlines happening today, Monday. Everybody's still talking about, we got weather, and then we got the Cardinals. Boy, Cardinals, they could have won that, and they should have won that, but that late interception by Carson really put a big dagger in that drive there. And it would have been good if the Cardinals could have snuck out of Pittsburgh with a win, but we'll have to see what they do on Monday. Coming back home next Monday, playing Baltimore. Should be a great game. Monday Night Football, always a great game. Happy to be here with you, everybody. My name is Mike Pace. I'll be with you until about 12:30 this afternoon. Kinsey will come in and provide some coverage for about an hour. We'll take a break. We'll be back on at 2:30, and then we'll be updating you throughout the day on the latest headlines and happenings going on. And I got a good one for you guys. A little bit later, we're going to detail America's favorite Halloween costumes by state. You won't believe what Arizona is. I couldn't believe it. And these are more just of the basic Halloween costume. It's nothing like, like Donald Trump or any of those. It's just more of your your Cinderellas or your Batmans. Very, very basic things. So far, nobody on the states is really going for the Donald Trump. But that could all change. Speaking of Donald Trump and the rest of the candidates, I do have an update for you on the latest situation that is going on. Let me see. It might not be in yet. No, it is not in, so we'll get you that update a little bit later. But coming up in about a half an hour, we're going to have that drones update from the FAA. They were just talking about it. But let's first now go over to back to the White House, where the press secretary is speaking. We'll see that coverage for just a little bit.
A couple of bad things from happening and not really imagine accomplishing much beyond that.
Well, Major, I guess this is what I was alluding to, which is that we are in a place now, I think where unfortunately the ambitions for congressional action are limited to just the essentials. And in this case, there's not a lot of discussion in the Republican Party, even in the context of a contested speaker's election, about the kind of ambitious agenda that Republicans are hoping to advance with their strong majorities in the House and Senate. There's no discussion of that. Right now, the only thing we're discussing is how to prevent another government shutdown, how to ensure that we're not risking the full faith and credit of the United States, how do we make sure that our basic national security priorities are properly funded. These are not ambitious proposals. These are the basic essentials that the American people expect of their Congress.
So there would constitute the basics.
Essentially, there might be a couple of other things I'd put on there. The reauthorizing the XM Bank, making sure that we can fund our infrastructure through another transportation bill. There are a couple of other essentials in there, but not many. And certainly, and again, these are not the kinds of things that are the visions of transformational leaders. These are the responsibilities that every single Congress, since the very first one, has had to confront. And when it comes to the debt limit, we've seen the previous Congresses have not been willing to risk the full faith and credit of the United States, and we're hopeful that this Congress will follow suit.
One last quick topic. The Pentagon says the memorandum of understanding with Russia is probably going to be released tomorrow. Over there, they don't want to call it an agreement because there's not an agreement between these two countries about what's happening. There's just a legal document that says, well, I guess we'll stay out of each other's way. How would you characterize what this actually is and what it represents, and how it fits in with anything that approximates a strategy between the two countries in Syria?
Yeah. Well, I don't have an update for you on the timing of that document. The Department of Defense can give you the best assessment, and it sounds like that may be their best assessment. This is the result of now 3 different conversations that have occurred between military officials on the United States side and their Russian counterparts. And we have described these kinds of consultations as practical, operational level discussions intended to deconflict their activities from ours. And this is the kind of thing that would ensure that Russian pilots are operating consistent with international safety regulations. This is ensuring that when pilots are operating, that they're using internationally recognized communications channels, that they're speaking English, so that we can avoid mishaps. But this does not at all rise to the level of any sort of strategic cooperation at all. The other data point that I would bring to your attention is that over the weekend, the Department of Defense announced that a military operation had succeeded in northwestern Syria that resulted in the death of Sanafi al-Nasser. This is the leader of an extremist organization with designs on carrying out attacks against the West, yes, the Khorasan group. I'll just note that this is an airstrike that was conducted in northwest Syria. And I think this is an indication that the United States will do what is necessary to ensure that our interests are protected and that our safety and security are protected. The reason that northwest Syria location is notable is because we know this is where the Russians are spending a lot of time and carrying out a lot of their military operations. But in this instance, the United States was able to successfully carry out this operation without any undue interference from the Russians.
Thanks.
Okay. Lala.
Two questions. What are your expectations from the later this week? President is meeting the Pakistani Prime Minister on Thursday.
The President is looking forward to welcoming the Pakistani Prime Minister to the White House later this week. Obviously, there are a range of issues that are important for us to discuss, including the announcement that the President made last week about our strategy in Afghanistan moving forward. We certainly have an important security relationship, and the security cooperation between our two countries is beneficial to the safety and security of the citizens in both our countries. And I'm confident that will be the focal point of discussions. But we'll have a little bit more that we can share as the meeting gets closer.
But you completely rule out a civil nuclear deal with Pakistan, or is there something talks going on that?
Well, last week I got asked about this, about the sort of reports that the United States and Pakistan were planning or that published reports indicated that there may be a breakthrough in this regard, and I would significantly reduce your expectations about that occurring on Thursday.
And secondly, in Afghanistan, the Taliban hit a F-16. Are you worried about the increasing capabilities of the Taliban in Afghanistan?
For questions about those kinds of questions, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense. I'm not aware of that specific report. Okay. All right. Kevin.
Thanks, Josh. On Friday, at least it's been reported that you pulled the plug on plans to sell oil and gas drilling rights in the Arctic. And I'm curious, I just read a quote from Kowski, Senator from Alaska. She said that decision is stunningly short-sighted and betrays the Interior Department to the state of Alaska. What's the mindset, especially given the need for energy security?
Well, Kevin, this is a decision that was largely made and announced by the Department of Interior. They're responsible for conducting those lease sales. And the conclusion that the Department of Interior reached is that given the given market conditions and given the broader state of the industry, that moving forward with those lease sales at this point was not the right decision. Obviously, I think the President has indicated, and the facts bear this out, a genuine commitment to energy independence, that the amount of oil and gas production in the United States under the leadership of President Obama is higher than it's ever been. But so is the amount of energy that we generate from renewable energy like wind and solar. And that's consistent with the strategy that the President has pursued, and it is one that has served our economy quite well.
I also spoke with another congressional member from that state who mentioned icebreakers and curiosity about whether or not more has been done or could be done to purchase more icebreakers for that part of the country. In particular, it has national security implications. What has the White House, what has the President planned, prepared to do to improve that, what, as it was put to me, a woefully insecure circumstance?
Well, Kevin, it's, you'll recall the President, when he traveled to Alaska earlier this year, just 6 weeks or so ago, announced that there are some additional ice-breaking assets that would be deployed to Alaska. These would have important national security consequences, but some important economic consequences as well. And so, investing in that kind of capability is important. And the president's indicated a willingness just as recently as 6 weeks ago to make that kind of investment.
And what's the latest on that? Has anything happened? Is there anything concrete that he can point to?
We'll see if we can get you an update on that. I haven't heard. We'll see if we can get you an update on that.
Okay, lastly, this is sort of broad stroke as approached by some of my colleagues here in the front row. Having been to this
All right, everybody, we will be dipping out of that right now. It is a little past 10:30 on a beautiful, beautiful Monday morning. Happy that you're here with us. My name is Mike Page, and boy, yesterday did we have the weather. We're going to show you some of that in a little bit here, but we also have some other things to talk about as well coming up later in the show. Boy Scouts rescue some hikers in Massachusetts, so we'll have that great little story for you. And then I'm going to have a little bit later the top Halloween costumes by state. We'll talk about what Arizona is and the rest of the country. First, let's show you some of that weather that we had yesterday. Thunder and lightning rolled right through. So here is the very latest.
And maybe
Light up a cigar.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh, well, I know what your routine is.
But it was raining so hard, I said, no, I think I'll just go to bed.
Yeah.
Rain, hail, strong winds. It really was just crazy storm, and that storm left a lot of damage behind.
The damage is unreal in some parts of the valley. Troy Barrett is up in Skyfox this morning checking out some of that damage right around 51st Avenue and Camelback. Right, Troy?
That's right. We're right around 51st Avenue and Camelback. This whole area, we were up last night flying in the storm and getting some damage video. And this whole area was without power last night. Just a big, huge, dark hole. But one of the most striking parts of the damage that we're seeing this morning is this cotton storage facility that's right here, just a little bit north of the Maryville Hospital. And I'll give you a quick scan of all the damage. There are a little bit more than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings that have just been either damaged or annihilated completely. You can see as we zoom in that the storage facilities, the roofs have been ripped off, even the steel inside that holds up those structures are bent and torn down, and the tin and the aluminum that's on the outside of these buildings just thrown everywhere for about a half a mile, all the way from sort of east to west across this area. And we can see those crews off in the distance on 51st Avenue. They're hard at work getting those power poles back. There's one here at the end of all this damage from these cotton storage facilities, just snapped in half, and you can see it just hanging right there. And just a little bit to the south, we have even more poles down. Crews working hard to get this taken care of, but this is some of the most impressive damage that we have seen here this morning. More than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings damaged or destroyed.
I don't think I've ever seen damage like that before on any storm of that widespread.
Not here in the valley, at least.
No. That's
yeah, absolutely. You know, we've seen this a couple
That
of
was something to see yesterday. Wow. And then as daylight broke, we get to see kind of the scope of that damage. Wow. Just something to, haven't seen that in a while out here. Coming up at 11 o'clock, we are going to go live to an event that it's a billboard unveiling over at right near the ballpark over at 7th Street and Lincoln on the southwest corner. Its backers of Arizona Marijuana Initiative launch a Halloween-themed billboard highlighting the fact that marijuana is less harmful and less scary than alcohol. That is what they are saying, and that's what this billboard unveiling will look like. Coming up in just about 20 minutes, we will stream that live for you right here on Fox 10 News Now. That's coming up in just about 20 minutes. We do have some other stuff talking about Halloween time. We're getting very, very close to Halloween, just a couple weeks away here. And, well, there's a haunted house where this blind woman, it's a great story. This blind woman goes through it, and she wants to feel the surroundings because obviously she cannot see. So here is that story.
Jeez.
So the baby's just jumped.
Oh my God. First, I just went through and I got a full tour of the haunted house with, the lights on and everything, getting an audio description. And now I am getting my makeup done and I'm going to be in the haunted house. I'm excited.
Though she couldn't see what was coming up ahead, she could feel her way through every twist and turn.
Oh, this is weird.
She had the ability to go through, touch all the props, a lot of our special effects, our creepy walls, our the masks and all that kind of stuff. So feel her head up here.
The arm moves and it scares me.
So,
it was really cool to get to touch everything. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
She definitely got the fright she was looking for.
Oh my God.
She jumped quite a few times. We got some good jumps. Got a few screams out of her.
I can imagine everything, and I know that it's really scary when the lights are out and there's strobe lights on and everybody's like screaming and jumping out at you. Oh, this is the scariest part for sure.
For her to be able to appreciate it by me being able to convey it to her was such a heartwarming experience. It was a feel-good moment for me. I mean, just incredible.
And one thing Maureen knows for sure is being blind will never stop her from experiencing the world.
I mean, I think I can do anything. So it's just to be able to do anything that I want to do and experience life, and just to know that there isn't really any differences. I just don't see.
Great story. No boundaries. I love those type of stories. Great for that woman to still be able to really appreciate haunted houses. Even though she can't see, she could definitely feel the surroundings of that haunted house. Great for her. I love that story. We're going to continue on this Halloween little section of the show here. And as promised, I do have the most favorite Halloween costumes by state. We got the breakdown for you, and I do have it's a little fun little graphic here that we will show you guys. And there we go. Whoops, let me move it around. Can I? There we go. Got it. All right, here is the breakdown, everybody. And you see Arizona, and then you're like, well, what is that? They say the top Halloween costume in Arizona is the sugar skull. So I'm going to move this back up and take a look at the rest of the country, and you can see what some are. In California, right next to us, is Alice. So that's a little fun little infographic that was made. But are you surprised at Arizona for Sugar Skull? Let me know what you guys think about that, and if what you are planning to go as for Halloween this year. I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section. Fox 10 News Now. That's a fun little infographic right there. We'll get back to the action. Robert says that's awesome. Yeah, I did like that little infographic there. Coming up on 10:45 at 11 o'clock, we're going to have a billboard unveiling on 7th Street and Lincoln. It's pro-marijuana supporters that are saying that marijuana is less scary than alcohol. It's kind of a Halloween theme that they got going on there. So we're going to see that unveiling coming up at 11 o'clock right here on News Now. And then a little bit after that, we're going to hear on new drone regulations that will be coming to America. A lot of people are asking for drones for this holiday season, so those will be some of the new things that we will be discussing here on News Now as we get going into the morning. I do have the very latest on the Clinton Benghazi hearing preview that is happening on Thursday, but here is a preview of what we can expect.
Some indications that Hillary Clinton is taking a couple of days off from the campaign trail this week to prepare for this testimony, not knowing exactly what issues may arise. The Benghazi, Libya attacks that claimed the lives of a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans may have happened 3 years ago, but they could provide some fresh political fodder on Capitol Hill. And Hillary Clinton is aggressively questioning the purpose of the congressional committee she'll be facing this week.
They ended up becoming a partisan arm of the Republican National Committee, with an overwhelming focus on trying to, as they admitted, drive down my poll numbers.
And Clinton points to statements from Republicans like House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who suggested that there was a political agenda at play here. But she will also have to answer some critical questions about why her State Department denied requests to enhance diplomatic security in Libya and why the attacks were initially mischaracterized by the administration. The Republican heading up the investigation says this is not political.
But the 7 members of my committee are much more focused on the 4 dead Americans than we are anyone's presidential aspirations.
What difference at this point does it make?
Now, Clinton has challenged Congress before on these matters, but the investigation did uncover, among other things, Clinton's private email server, which has been a constant issue for her campaign. And watching all of this is Vice President Joe Biden, considering his own White House run and perhaps waiting to see if Clinton stumbles.
He's going to want to see how she performs in that setting, whether there is, as you're pointing out, a new fact that comes out, something very damning that makes her an untenable candidate, then he'll jump in. But I just think even coming in this late, it's just a tough road to climb.
Hillary Clinton may walk into this hearing this week brimming with confidence after what was seen as a pretty strong debate performance last week, but this also carries some substantial risk for the campaign. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
There's no end in sight in an escalating feud between Republican frontrunner Donald Trump and GOP opponent Jeb Bush. Trump insisting things would have been different if he were president during 9/11 and not George W. Bush.
I'm extremely tough on people coming into this country. I believe that if I were running things, I doubt that those people would have been in the country.
An incredulous Jeb Bush defended his brother with a tweet. How pathetic for Donald Trump to criticize the president for 9/11. We were attacked and my brother kept us safe. The war of words detracting from substantive presidential policy discussions.
Every day Jeb Bush talks about his brother's legacy is a day that he's not talking about why he, Jeb Bush, should be president of the United States.
Trump's tussle with Bush is not his only campaign concern. Fox News has learned both Trump and Ben Carson will likely get Secret Service protection as threats have grown against the number 1 and 2 GOP candidates. And more bad news for Hillary Clinton as an independent audit revealed the State Department was among the worst agencies in the entire federal government at protecting its computer networks during Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State. The week does not get any easier for Hillary Clinton as she gets set to testify before the House Committee on Benghazi this Thursday. In Washington, Joel Waldman, Fox News.
All right, some interesting stuff as we got a little update on the GOP side as well as Hillary Clinton. And speaking of Hillary Clinton, did you guys happen to see SNL on Saturday? Kind of some fun skits that they had with Hillary as well as Larry David being Bernie Sanders. That was funny. Also, I do want to update you guys now on a story that is just a great heartwarming story as well. Boy Scouts rescue a hiker over the weekend in Massachusetts. You gotta love these kind of stories. This is exactly what they teach you in Boy Scouts, to be a leader and then also a helper when in need.
I guess you could say we're brothers figuratively.
These 6 Boy Scouts, proud members of Weymouth's Troop 9, put their first aid merit badges to good use on Saturday.
It's nothing really big. We just tried to help out.
The boys, aged 12 to 17, were descending New Hampshire's Mount Monadnock during a troop campout when they discovered a hiker who'd fallen and sprained her ankle.
Grabbed a couple sticks just from the woods and used ace bandage, which some of the scouts had on them, and made her like a makeshift splint.
Then the grueling part, called the fireman's carry.
We linked arms together. She then sat down. Then we maneuvered around certain rocks.
5 hours and nearly 2 miles of tough terrain later, they arrived at the bottom. Their adult leader and Dr. Mike Jacklich says training paid off.
I was so proud of them. I mean, the splint was perfect.
Injured hiker Linda was taken to the hospital. On Sunday, she spoke to us by phone while recovering at home.
I said, you guys are my little angels, I swear, because I just felt so safe with them.
Her ER doctor says she could have suffered a fracture had it not been for her rescuers and their impressive work.
He couldn't believe it. He's like, who did your splint? I'm like, Boy Scout, troop number 9.
But these boys aren't fazed by the praise. After all, a good deed is all in a day's work.
No matter what the situation, you're always helping out somebody that's in need.
Love that kind of story. That is awesome. Big kudos to those Boy Scouts for helping that hiker out. Coming up on 10:50 here. I'm jumping the gun. Look at that. Wow, 10:50. In about 10 minutes, we are going to take you live out to 7th Street and Lincoln, where there is going to be a billboard unveiling. Some pro marijuana supporters are saying that marijuana is less scary and spookier than alcohol. So we will have that for you coming up in about 10 minutes. But let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals while we have the chance today. Oh boy, they lose yesterday. It was a hard one to watch at the end of the game. They were so dominant in the beginning, but Arizona loses 25-13 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh now goes to 4-2, as well as Arizona with a 4-2 record. When you break down the stats and you take a look at them, Arizona had 21 first downs compared to 14 by Pittsburgh. Arizona covered 469 yards compared to 310 by the Steelers, but this is where it hurts. This is where it really hurts when it comes to turnovers. Arizona had 3, so they really need to clean it up. If you can't have 3 turnovers and think you're going to win a game. Absolutely not. So they really need to clean that up because Pittsburgh had 0 turnovers, and that was key to them winning the game on Sunday. Just a crazy. I mean, we lost a fumble, so it was just a hard thing to see, and then especially when Cutler threw that interception late in the game when we had a good drive going, just definitely took the wind out of our sails there. But we'll see how they rebound. Next Monday, we have a Monday night game against a sluggish Baltimore Ravens, but never count out the Baltimore Ravens. And you never know who's going to show up on Monday Night Football. That's why it's always a great game to watch. As always, we appreciate everybody watching the Fox 10 News Now stream. I know that there's been it's been a little sluggish there or choppy, the feed there, but I'm glad that everybody is continuing to watch. Coming up in just about 8 minutes, we'll take you out live to that billboard unveiling, but first let's give you a little bit of a live feed coming in the State Department.
Understand the Israeli government has announced an investigation into this incident and would refer you to them for more specifics. Acknowledging the heightened sense of fear among Israeli citizens, and amid this ongoing violence, I would just note what the mayor of Beersheba said to his citizens, which is that they shouldn't take the law into their own hands.
Have people in the building had a chance to see some of the footage from this incident where you have him laying on the ground bleeding and then people throwing chairs and stomping on him and doing all sorts of...
There are people in this building who have seen the footage, yes, Brian.
And does this type of... I mean, you mentioned fear, but that's not the first adjective or first sentiment that strikes one when one watches that. It looks more like anger, hatred, whatever you want to call it. Are you concerned that this is even just among the Israeli population getting out of hand with this kind of acts of violence?
Well, again, I think the mayor said it best when he said, urge the people not to take the law into their own hands. Whether it's fear, anger, whatever, this incident is being investigated by Israeli authorities. So, we'll let them be the arbiter of what transpired.
You don't know of anyone who's been arrested or anything like that?
I'm not sure, no.
I just want to follow on Brad's point.
Please.
I mean, he's talking about a lynch mob kind of atmosphere. And there's obviously heightened rhetoric that contributes to that kind of,
And we've spoken to that as
Right.
well, Said. We've said that everybody needs to, everybody needs to tone down the rhetoric, reduce the violence, take affirmative action, affirmative steps
I think Brad's point is that he's saying that, look, the people stomping, it's hatred and all these things. That's a lynch mob kind of atmosphere. I mean, you certainly warn against such a thing, right?
I go back to, I don't know how I could say much more clearly, is people should not take the law into their own hands.
But there were incidents where actually the law enforcement, whether it's the Israeli army or the police and so on, we're actually looking at similar incidents, maybe not so graphic as the one we've seen, but in past incidents. So you would call on Israeli authorities and the police and so on not to use excessive force, which you backtracked from the other day.
No, that's look. We always call on, frankly, not just Israeli security forces, but security forces all over the world to exercise proper restraint. That being said, we certainly recognize Israel's right to defend itself, separate and apart from what we're talking about here, which is, as you said, this incident involving the death of an Eritrean man. I think I said it pretty clearly that, there's heightened fear, anger, there's a lot of emotion. People, as the mayor of Beersheba said, people shouldn't take the law into their own hands. There's an investigation underway. Let's let that play itself out. Thank you. Yeah, Pam.
Back to Michelle's question from earlier concerning the Secretary's upcoming trip. It seems like there was an initial willingness expressed on the Israeli side with the announcement last week that Prime Minister Netanyahu was willing to meet with Kerry, possibly in Germany, and then nothing really from Palestinian leader Abbas's side. Is there reluctance on the Palestinian side to have a meeting with Kerry?
No, and I don't want to, get into the dynamics. I mean, certainly, I think almost somewhat legitimately, both on the Israeli side as well as the Palestinian side, they've got a lot of violence going on in their country and the region rather, and they're trying to cope with it, and yet certainly there's a willingness to meet with the Secretary to discuss a way forward, but it's a very dynamic and fluid situation. So again, we don't have a firm schedule to give you all. Once we do, we'll share it. Yes, sir.
Likely to have that scheduled today?
Hope so. I mean, they're on the flight back now, but we're still trying to iron it out. And once we do, we'll hopefully be able to give you some more information about it.
And what makes you think that the Secretary's intervention in this instance, if he does go ahead with his planned meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and perhaps also sees President Abbas, what makes you think that that is likely to de-escalate tensions with regard to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif?
Well, a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, one is, there's, the power of convening. So if we bring these various parties and people together to talk about some of these issues and discuss appropriate affirmative actions, we hope that can be a mechanism to bring about a reduction in tensions. Again, what we're talking about and what we've talked about before is trying to find a way forward through positive affirmative actions that both sides can take to end this, as I said, this ongoing cycle, uptick, however you want to describe it, of violence. Somebody needs to break the chain, and not somebody, both sides need to take appropriate measures to reduce the tensions and break the ongoing violence.
What you mentioned one of the things that you believe Abbas could do, which was to call for an end to violence. What are the practices that he and Prime Minister Netanyahu can do?
Sure. I don't want to necessarily prescribe.
All right, we will dip out of that coverage. We were supposed to have a live stream for you guys coming up at 11 o'clock, but due to some difficulties, we will not be able to have that for you, but we will get it taped, and then we will show you that billboard unveilment a little bit later, probably this afternoon, when Kinsey and I do the show from there. But then, let's see, I will update you guys all now. Whoops. on the very latest that we will be covering starting at 11 right here. Once again, Valley Storm update. Hillary Clinton is going to be testifying on Thursday about the Benghazi attacks. We'll have a preview for you on that one. And then we'll feature once again the Boy Scouts that rescued a hiker. But before all of that, I want to take you out to what was... yes. Okay, we will go to that. The FAA had a announcement on the drone situation that they would like to see some new registration for people that are getting drones. So if you guys are into that, we will be showing you that right now. This is from the FAA.
Helicopter Association International, Precision Hawk, and AirMap. The United States Department of Transportation is bullish about technology and transportation. The rate of change driven by technology in other sectors in our lives has now reached the transportation sector, and it requires this agency to be agile enough to adapt and integrate innovation into our national transportation system. Whether we're talking about driverless cars or unmanned aircraft, we're committed as an agency to recognizing the potential of these innovations while we establish the ground rules to ensure their safe integration into our national transportation system. We fully appreciate the potential of unmanned aircraft to transform transportation, commerce, and quality of life. In fact, unmanned aircraft are already doing some really important things, like inspecting infrastructure and crops and aiding wildlife monitoring. They're also being used by the movie industry and by entrepreneurs to promote all kinds of businesses. But we've also seen unmanned aircraft interfere, not help, with our lives. Most recently in California during wildfire operations. Some have come too close to airplanes and airports. And even at the U.S. Open tennis tournament in September, an unmanned aircraft flying in a densely populated area near LaGuardia Airport crashed inside Arthur Ashe Stadium during a match. As we continue to work on protocols and procedures for the integration of unmanned aircraft into the national airspace system, we must work ever harder to ensure a strong culture of safety, accountability, and responsibility among users. This year, pilots have reported seeing unmanned aircraft twice as frequently as they did in 2014. And the number of unmanned aircraft in our airspace continues to grow at astounding rates. So today I want to share with you some additional measures we're taking to ensure that unmanned aircraft are safely integrated into the national airspace. We're going to require operators of drones to register their aircraft just like commercial drone operators do currently. Think of it this way. It may be okay to operate an off-road vehicle without registering it if you're using it on your own property. However, if you intend to take it onto local streets or onto highways, you're expected to register it and operate it safely to protect the public. The details of this new registration system will be developed by a task force consisting of government, leaders, and a diverse group of stakeholders who will work on a tight deadline to get this work done. First, registration will reinforce the need for unmanned aircraft users, including consumers and hobbyists, to operate their drones safely. It's really hard to follow rules if you don't know what the rules are, or that the rules apply to you. And so registration gives operators the opportunity to learn the airspace rules before they fly and enjoy their devices safely. Second, registration will help us enforce the rules against those who operate unsafely by allowing the FAA to identify the operators of unmanned aircraft. We can take enforcement action as necessary to protect the airspace for everyone. If unmanned aircraft operators break the rules, clearly there should be consequences. But in fact, there can be no accountability if a person breaking the rules can't be identified. Registration will now allow us to identify them. We've done a lot with education and with outreach to inform new users of the airspace, and we'll continue to do that outreach. For example, we've partnered with members of industry and the modeling community to initiate Know Before You Fly outreach campaigns, providing recreational operators with the information they need to fly safely and responsibly. Several unmanned aircraft manufacturers now voluntarily include educational materials in their packaging, and we thank them for that. The San Francisco 49ers football team even partnered with us to record a short commercial to discourage people from flying drones over their stadium. We're also working with many of the nation's major airports on a similar campaign to spread the message that flying around airports and runways is unsafe and will result in stiff penalties and fines. Additionally, the FAA has a national No Drone Zone campaign. The FAA is currently beta testing an app that helps unmanned aircraft operators determine whether there are any restrictions or requirements in effect where they want to fly. This step we're taking today has an added benefit as an additional educational tool. People registering their drones will be exposed to the rules and the reasons for those rules, and we believe this will help reduce some and will not all of our stakeholders for their continued input to ensure the successful integration of unmanned aircraft technology and their unflagging commitment to safety. And now I want to invite one of our guests up here, Brian Wynn of the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Brian, welcome. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and with FAA Administrator Michael Huerta. On behalf of the 7,500 members of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, we welcome the opportunity to join this task force of government and industry stakeholders. This collaborative effort to develop an efficient process for UAS registration should lead to an increased accountability across the entire aviation community. Under FAA's proposed small UAS rules released earlier this year, commercial operators would be required to register their platforms. Extending this requirement to other UAS users will promote responsibility and safety. In addition to expanded UAS registration, we hope the FAA will finalize its small UAS rules soon. Once this happens, there will be an established framework for UAS operators allowing anyone who follows the rules to fly. Safety through education is also essential for UAS operations. That's why last year AUVSI, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, and the FAA launched the Know Before You Fly campaign, which seeks to educate newcomers to UAS technology about safe and responsible use. So far, 24 associations, organizations, and businesses from both the manned and unmanned aviation communities have become supporters of Know Before You Fly. These supporters include UAS manufacturers and distributors who are putting Know Before You Fly materials in product packaging at the point of sale and online to provide consumers with the information they need to fly safely. AUVSI is pleased to be part of this initiative and to work with the other task force members on this important issue for the UAS industry and the entire aviation community. With that, it's my pleasure to bring up Rich Hansen, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for the Academy of Model Aeronautics.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Secretary Fox and Mr. Huerta for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. The Academy of Model Aeronautics and its more than 180,000 members across the country recognize the importance of this issue. We stand ready to lend our nearly 80 years of experience in managing the model aircraft community and operating recreational UAS in finding a reasonable and appropriate solution to this issue. Registration of certain UAS that meet an appropriate threshold of weight, capability, and other safety factors makes sense. In fact, AMA's safety program already instructs all members to place their AMA number or their name and address either on or within their aircraft. thus ensuring operator accountability and promoting safety within the model aviation community. This is just one of the many reasons why hundreds of thousands of model aircraft have operated harmoniously within our communities for decades. Even more of these devices are virtually toys that pose little to no risk, have minimal capabilities, and have an extremely short lifespan. The challenge, therefore, will be striking the right balance and setting the criterion threshold for registration at an appropriate and effective level. This process should be streamlined, welcoming, and unobtrusive to allow this emerging industry to flourish and the community of users to continue to enjoy the use of this technology, while necessarily keeping our airspace and our communities safe. At the same time, we will also continue working on the Know Before You Fly campaign that Brian mentioned just shortly, along with the FAA and our other supporters, to provide essential educational tools to the legions of new flyers taking to the skies. We look forward to continuing the advancing of all of these efforts. Thank you very much, and I would like to introduce now Captain Tim Connell, President of the Airline Pilots Association.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Secretary Fox. I am very pleased to be standing here representing not just the 52,000 members of the Airline Pilots Association International, but representing all commercial airline pilots around the world. I can say with confidence that safety is our collective priority. As the operators responsible for flying passengers and cargo, we are hyper-focused on ensuring the safety of our aviation system, including the safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems into the national airspace. ALPA fully supports Secretary Fox's decision to create a task force that will recommend procedures and policies for creating a national registration database for all UAS. In testimony I gave earlier this month at the House Aviation Subcommittee, and I will reiterate later this month at the Senate, I outlined ALPA's recommended 4-point action plan that included a registration component. This simple and necessary tactic will not only allow authorities to immediately identify the owner, but will also drive home the seriousness of operations of these UAS. The FAA task force is certainly a step in the right direction, but we also need timely decisions. There is an anticipation of sale of more than 1 million UASs during this year's holiday season. This is on the heels of hundreds of FAA reports of pilots and UAS encounters. With all these safety concerns in mind, the Airline Pilots Association is ready to engage in discussions with its counterparts and to assist the task force in developing the procedures necessary to ensure we maintain the highest levels of safety of our aviation system. Thank you again, Secretary Fox, for your leadership on this important issue.
Now, Administrator Huerta and I will. Well, finding the drone has not been as much of a problem as finding the person who was using the drone. And the registration is designed to close that loophole. Yeah.
Secretary, the first question is, what kind of information from consumers would be required at this point? What information are you envisioning having to ask an individual when they want to register? And secondly, how possible is it to actually make sure that every single drone is indeed registered? And how do you foresee that you'd be able to prevent someone from skirting the registration system?
So let's start with the first question. In terms of registration, I think the intent here is to create as user-friendly a portal as possible. And again, the task force is going to have to wrestle with some of the questions about how much information to ask from consumers. But clearly identifiable information that helps us point back to the user is going to be critical. Your next question about, I just sort of blanked on your next question, so.
Well, do you believe that it's possible to actually make sure that every single drone that's sold, whether it's online, whether it's in a brick and mortar store, that it is actually registered? How will you make sure that a bad guy, for example, with malicious intent does not skirt the registration system?
Well, so I think we have to compare the before and after. Today there is no requirement for individual consumers like you and me to register. And so we are now moving towards a registration requirement. I think many, if not most users, will comply because of the attention that we are giving to this issue. But as I said in the previous question, that there are penalties associated with using these devices in the national airspace without complying with the registration requirement.
Mr. Secretary, to use the term drone police, there really are no drone police. The administrator has some civil authority, but if you want to take criminal activity, it's up to local and state authorities. There's all this talk about enforcement, but can you truly enforce somebody who is violating the national airspace?
Well, look, right now, if we have to go through a lot of steps to be able to identify who, in fact, was using a drone. This effort to register will give us the information we need to trace back to the user. That's an important piece of information to help us, and there are actual federal penalties associated with violating the requirement that we will be imposing.
But who in the federal government is going to go after those individuals?
Well, look, I think our typical process is for the Justice Department to prosecute these actions. But again, when you can't identify who, in fact, was using the drone, it makes it very difficult. That's what this registration requirement is designed to fix. And Michael, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
I think the only thing that I would add, David, is this is a partnership that we do with local law enforcement. And the important thing that we're doing today is establishing what the rules are. And the rules are, we're expecting you to be registered if you operate within the national airspace system. With that clarification, which is an authority that we currently have, then that creates a template if you are not operating within with that proper registration. That provides a basis for us to go after you and with our other law enforcement partners. It's a partnership of the FAA, which sets the regulatory framework, working with our law enforcement partners.
Yes.
Hi. Correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I thought MAP 21 said that FAA wasn't supposed to regulate these hobbyists that are using drones. And so I'm wondering if you have the legal authority here to require this registration, since a lot of the people who are buying these drones, many of them are members of the Academy, but many are not, are just hobbyists.
So we're not requiring licensure of the operators. They're not required to get a license to operate them in that sense.
National airspace system, and but this whole range of issues of how do we ensure safe operation is what we're trying to get at, and an important part of that. The enforcement activities that we've been undergoing, that's an important part of it. But registration provides us an opportunity to tie the aircraft with the operator, which is another tool in the toolbox going forward. And ultimately what we're trying to do is also use this as an opportunity to educate new users of unmanned aircraft, of how to operate in the national airspace system. This is all part of a whole set of things that we're doing as we work to integrate this technology into our system.
And there we go. So that was from a little bit earlier today, the FAA talking about their new plans to more regulate the drone industry. Can you believe it? All this talk about drones, a lot of people have them. We're getting more and more in the air. Sometimes you just see them buzzing around, you know, and so it'll be interesting to see how they develop those standards in the coming months, because as we know, it's one of the hottest already gift ideas for teens and young adults. We'll have much more on that when more news does become available. Let's look at our 10-day though. This is what we can expect. Looking beautiful. Look at especially the weekend and into next week. Just sunny skies. Well, we do have some more chances for possible showers Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before things really settle down. Thursday, looking at 81 degrees. Gotta love it, with a low of 65. So that's what we can expect in the coming days and for next week. Here's what we have going coming up in the next hour, everybody. we do have, we'll continue to update you on this valley storm, but then also the news stories this hour. A North Carolina student was beaten severely, so we will have a story on that, as well as a deputy was killed at a hospital. Another tragic story. And then we have a snake, not on a plane, but a bus. You're gonna like this story. But let's first go to North Carolina, with that student was beaten and hospitalized. Here is the story.
The South Booker Street about 2:15 Sunday morning, and EMS arrived 3 minutes later. Now, police tell us that everyone who was here claimed not to see anything, but the mother of the young man who was beaten says that somebody must have seen something. Cedrine Bynum spent all night and day with her son Thomas at the hospital.
When I got to the hospital, my son was non-responsive.
He's awake now, but had cuts and bruises all over his face and body. Thomas is a junior at NCA&T, an applied engineering technology student.
He was at a party off campus for the football team.
She says her son was at an apartment off South Booker Street when he bumped into somebody at the party who started shoving him.
The guy turned around and pushed him again. He pushed him 2 times. Then they had words, and when the guy went to go push him the 3rd time, my son hit him. And when he hit the guy, at that point, that's when he said they started beating on him.
Bynum says 10 to 15 people beat him up and shoved him down 3 flights of stairs.
Not only did they beat him, but people stood there and watched. My son could have died. I could have gone to the hospital to identify his body. In fact, he actually had to crawl under a car in order for them to stop beating him.
Greensboro police are investigating, and Bynum hopes students who were there will come forward with more information.
But it's not going to end here. I think that everyone that was involved should be expelled from school immediately.
NCA&T officials said the fight happened off campus, and they could not yet confirm who was involved. Thomas Bynum is still in the hospital tonight. His mom says he'll stay under observation until they're sure his head injuries are not severe. They're not sure when he'll be released.
All right, so thank you for that update. Let's get you caught up on the weather. If you're just joining the stream, welcome. My name is Mike Page. It is Monday morning, going into the afternoon pretty soon, but yesterday, you guys know what was happening. We had a lot of rain, thunder, and lightning, and boy, West Valley got it this time. Take a look at these crazy aerials, just crazy.
Light up a cigar.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh, well, I know what your routine is.
But it was raining so hard, I said, no, I think I'll just go to bed.
Yeah.
Rain, hail, strong winds. It really was just crazy storm, and that storm left a lot of damage behind.
The damage is unreal in some parts of the valley. Troy Barrett is up in Sky Fox this morning checking out some of that damage right around 51st Avenue and Camelback, right, Troy?
That's right. We're right around 51st Avenue and Camelback. This whole area, we were up last night flying in the storm and getting some damage video, and this whole area was without power last night, just a big, huge, dark hole. But one of the most striking parts of the damage that we're seeing this morning is this cotton storage facility that's right here, just a little bit north of the Maryville Hospital. And I'll give you a quick scan of all the damage. There are a little bit more than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings that have just been either damaged or annihilated completely. You can see as we zoom in that the storage facilities, the roofs have been ripped off, even the steel inside that holds up those structures are bent and torn down, and the tin and the aluminum that's on the outside of these buildings just thrown everywhere for about a half a mile, all the way from sort of east to west across this area. And we can see those crews off in the distance on 51st Avenue. They're hard at work getting those power poles back. There's one here at the end of all this damage from these cotton storage facilities, just snapped in half, and you can see it just hanging right there. And just a little bit to the south, we have even more poles down. Crews working hard to get this taken care of, but this is some of the most impressive damage that we have seen here this morning. More than a dozen of these cotton storage buildings damaged or destroyed.
I don't think I've ever seen damage like that before on any storm of that widespread.
Not here in the valley, at least.
No. That's
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've seen this a couple of times, say down around Eloy, where
Yeah.
they get some very strong microbursts at those cotton storage facilities down there, but I've never seen anything like this, at least this widespread and just so much damage in one area in the middle of town. This is just incredible to see.
yeah.
Obliterated.
And no
Wow.
reports of anybody being injured or anything that we know of, I guess, huh, Troy?
And that was from earlier this morning on our Fox 10 Sky Fox aerials. Really, wow, what a sight to see this morning as day broke, and we were able to see some of that damage that happened yesterday. Totally crazy. That stuff you see like in the Midwest. All right, moving on. We do have a tragic story to bring you out in Minnesota. A deputy was killed at a hospital. Take a look at this story and how it happened.
As you can imagine, it's been just a whirlwind of events of this very tragic situation.
A Minnesota community is grieving after a sheriff's deputy is shot and killed inside a hospital. The incident happening early Sunday morning in the town of St. Cloud.
I would hope that everyone would keep Investigator Sandberg, his wife and daughter, in their thoughts and prayers in the coming days.
According to police, Deputy Stephen Sandberg was guarding a suspect by the name of Danny Hammond. That's when the 50-year-old got out of his hospital bed, grabbed Sandberg's gun, and killed him.
Several shots were fired during that struggle, and then security officers were able to get into the room, and the subject was tased with a taser and taken into custody.
Just minutes after Hammond was restrained, he went into cardiac arrest.
Medical personnel performed life-saving operations on him, and he died at that time.
Meantime, hospital staff insist all protocols were being followed.
We're very appreciative for the acts of our staff who contained this.
As the investigation continues, those in the tight-knit community are paying tribute to the 60-year-old law enforcement officer, calling him a hometown hero.
It's going to be a tough one, especially for a small community like this. We go to the same church for many years.
His family has been neighbors of ours for years.
Police have not said why Hammond, who was the subject of a domestic violence investigation, was being treated at the hospital. Kelly Wright, Fox News.
Wow, such a horrible story there over the weekend that happened out there in Minnesota. You just never like to hear those stories, and hear this officer just trying to do his job and gets shot at the hospital. Unreal. Wow. So sad right there. We'll continue on. I'll try to change the focus here a little. We got a fun one here. Snakes? No, not on a plane, but a bus. We got that story for you. We'll shake it on up a little bit, or maybe slither our way to it, this story.
Their reaction was running off the bus.
Bus riders in West Philly couldn't get off of SEPTA's 52 bus fast enough once they found out this guy was a passenger.
Reminded me of snakes on the plane. Now we got snakes on the bus.
The snake scare forced the bus driver to pull over near 52nd and Westminster. The bus evacuated and police were called. After about an hour, an officer pulls out the non-venomous 4-foot red-tailed Brazilian boa constrictor and hands it over to its owner, Karan Riley.
It was in my pocket. You know, usually she fall asleep, but I guess she wanted to crawl around. She crawled under the seat, and I couldn't get her out of there, and she got stuck.
Riley was on his way home from the pet store with dinner for his snake. That's right, a live rat inside this box who also took the bus trip. So what was the reaction from fellow passengers?
A couple of people did. A couple of people freaked out. Yeah, babies, everybody freaked out.
Transit police say uncaged animals on board its buses are not allowed. Although just a little while after getting his snake back, its owner was right back on the 52 bus again carrying the snake and live rat. As for that bus driver, he gave us the thumbs up, but he was glad his reptile passenger was gone.
What was the bus driver's reaction? Just get it off, you know what I'm saying? Just to get it, find it, and just try to get it off the bus.
I love that story. What a weird story there. I'm glad I was able to share that with you guys, though, to kind of break up that sadness that we were having. Snakes on a plane, and then he has a rat on there as well. You can't make this stuff up, folks. You really, really can't. Well, coming up in a little bit, it's on Thursday is going to be Hillary Clinton hearing on the Benghazi situation that happened about 3 years ago. We have a preview right now.
The Clinton campaign is taking this seriously. There are some indications that Hillary Clinton is taking a couple of days off from the campaign trail this week to prepare for this testimony, not knowing exactly what issues may arise. The Benghazi, Libya attacks that claimed the lives of a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans may have happened 3 years ago, but they could provide some fresh political fodder on Capitol Hill. And Hillary Clinton is aggressively questioning the purpose of the congressional committee she'll be facing this week.
They ended up becoming a partisan arm of the Republican National Committee with an overwhelming focus on trying to, as they admitted, drive down my poll numbers.
And Clinton points to statements from Republicans like House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who suggested that there was a political agenda at play here. But she will also have to answer some critical questions about why her State Department denied requests to enhance diplomatic security in Libya and why the attacks were initially mischaracterized by the administration. The Republican heading up the investigation says this is not political.
But the 7 members of my committee are much more focused on the 4 dead Americans than we are anyone's presidential aspirations.
What difference at this point does it make?
Now, Clinton has challenged Congress before on these matters, but the investigation did uncover, among other things, Clinton's private email server, which has been a constant issue for her campaign. And watching all of this is Vice President Joe Biden, considering his own White House run and perhaps waiting to see if Clinton stumbles.
He's going to want to see how she performs in that setting, whether there is, as you're pointing out, a new fact that comes out, something very damning that makes her an untenable candidate, then he'll jump in. But I just think even coming in this late, it's just a tough road to climb.
Hillary Clinton may walk into this hearing this week brimming with confidence after what was seen as a pretty strong debate performance last week, but this also carries some substantial risk for the campaign. In Washington, Doug Lucy.
All right, so that is your update. That is coming on Thursday, and you can imagine, you just know that News Now will be focusing on that on Thursday. We will bring that to you live. So that is going to be very, very revealing to see what comes out of that on Thursday. News Now will have that for you. Coming up now, we're going to take you to an event. Carly Fiorina, a little bit from some of her statements that she made on Friday. We got that for you right now.
To take a chance on us, I certainly have. I started my career as a secretary. I typed, I filed, I answered the phones for a 9-person real estate firm. So I've needed plenty of people to take a chance on me. And every one of us at some point needs somebody to give us a helping hand. I needed a helping hand when I battled cancer. We needed many helping hands when we were trying to help our daughter struggle and ultimately beat the addictions which took her life. And yet, it's also true that every single one of us has potential. It is something my mother taught me a long time ago when I was a little girl, 8 years old, one morning on a Sunday morning. She looked at me and the rest of her Sunday school class. She was my Sunday school teacher that year. And she said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And I have come to learn in my life that everyone indeed has God-given gifts. Everyone has potential, regardless of their circumstances. In fact, most people have far more potential than they realize. And so I wondered, as I left the slums of New Delhi that day, being reminded once again that yes, everyone has God-given gifts, everyone has potential, everyone, regardless of their circumstances, can build a better life and live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. And that is what I saw in those women's eyes. I wonder, why is it that more things have been more possible for more people from more places here in this nation than anywhere else on the face of the planet? Because the truth is, we are not a perfect nation, but it is undeniably true that more things have been more possible for more people from more places here than anywhere else on earth. In fact, I am keenly aware that it is only in this nation, and I have lived and traveled and worked all over the world for many decades, it is only in this nation that a young woman could start out, as I did, in the middle of a deep recession, typing and filing and answering the phones for a little real estate firm, go on one day to become the chief executive of what we turned into the largest technology company in the world, and run for the presidency of the United States. That's only possible here. And the question is why? Why? Because at this pivotal point in our nation's history, I think we need to understand why. Because the truth is, too many people's possibilities are being crushed in this nation. So why is it that so much has been possible here? And I believe the answer lies in the idea upon which this nation was founded. You see, this nation was founded on an idea. And the idea was that each individual has value. That we judge people as individuals, not as a group. And our founders said that each individual life is filled with possibilities and potential, and here in this nation, they said, you have a right to find and use your God-given gifts and fulfill your potential. It is what they meant when they said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What they were talking about was the right to fulfill your potential. And here was the radical part, and it was radical at the time, and it's visionary still. They said that that right comes from God and cannot be taken away by man or government. I'm running for the presidency of the United States because I think we have reached a pivotal point in our nation's history. I think we have reached a pivotal point where the possibilities for too many Americans, indeed the potential of this nation, is being crushed by a government that has grown so big, so powerful, so costly, so complicated, so inept, and so corrupt, and a professional political class that refuses to do anything about it. Now, if you think those are harsh words, let me tell you that the vast majority of Americans agree with what I just said. In fact, Gallup has been asking a poll question for decades. The poll question is this: do you think the federal government is corrupt? 75% of the American people now say yes. So what does that mean? If 75% of the American people believe their government is corrupt, that means it's Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. It's young and old. It's men and women. It's people of every group. It means, in other words, that Americans are losing faith in their government, the government that they pay for. 82% of the American people now think we have a professional political class, which cares more about the protection of its own power, position, and privilege than it does about getting anything done. So what's 82% tell you? It's young and old, it's men and women, it's Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Everybody's decided, guess what? In this citizen government, and that's what we were intended to be, a citizen government, the politicians no longer serve us, and the government no longer serves those who pay for it. That's a pivotal point. And in truth, of course, government has grown unbelievably powerful and corrupt and complicated and inept. And those are strong words. But guess what? Just think about a few examples. Do you remember when the scandal of the Arizona wait times at the VA hit about 18 months ago? Remember that? Remember, we learned to our disgrace, honestly, that veterans were dying waiting for appointments. And then we learned, it got worse, that the bureaucrats at the VA were cooking the books so nobody would figure that out. And the outrage of the American people was so strong that they put pressure on the political system, and the political system responded. Actually, politicians do respond to pressure if it's strong enough. And so Congress got together and passed, in 3 short weeks, a bipartisan bill saying that we could fire the top 400 senior executives at the VA if they didn't do their jobs. Good idea. I frankly think we should apply it all throughout government. When somebody isn't doing their job, there has to be consequence. How many people have been fired? 1, exactly. 1. And you know what we learned about 6 weeks ago? that 307,000 veterans have died waiting for health care. Has anything happened? Has there been any consequence? This is ineptitude that's killing, literally. Or here's another example. You're aware of the fact that the federal government has been spending more and more money each and every year, year after year, for 50 years under Republicans and Democrats alike. The government just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And yet, have you ever noticed how when there's something important that needs to be done, the government always says, we need more money. We need more money to secure the border. We need more money to rebuild our military. We need more money to send to our fighting men in Afghanistan blankets and pillows. That is what moms are having to send to their fighting men, sons in Afghanistan. We need more money to answer your taxpayer questions on tax day, and yet the government keeps spending more and more and more money every single year. You know why that's possible? Because we actually don't know where the money's being spent. We actually have no accountability for how the money's being spent. And every year in an appropriations hearing, we don't talk about all the money that's being spent. We only talk about the rate of increase over last year's money. And so the money just keeps getting spent, and yet we never have enough to do the important things because we never prioritize how we spend money. And of course, government gets as it spends and spends and spends. It crushes. We are tangling people's lives up in webs of dependence. I talked about giving a helping hand to those poor women in India. You know, if you're a single mom today and you have 2 kids and you're dependent on food stamps to help you raise those 2 kids, and you're working 20 hours a week and struggling, if you are fortunate enough to find a 40-hour-a-week job, all of those programs upon which you depend disappear. And so what do you think as a single mom? You think that's too much risk. I can't take that chance because what if I get fired? What if I lose my job? In other words, all the incentives in these programs of dependence tell people not to take the risk. Don't move forward. Don't work harder in your life. Lay back. It is the height of disrespect and disregard to our fellow citizens to assume that all they can do is be dependent on government, because everyone wants to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. Or I could tell you the story of the farmer right here in Iowa, the poultry farmer. Remember when avian flu hit Iowa? And remember how many birds sickened and died? And I met this poultry farmer, and he knew when his birds got sick, he knew what to do. He knew how to euthanize them. He knew that he had to stop the spread of this airborne disease. And yet the government, the federal government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture in this particular case, said to this poultry farmer, no, 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 you can't do that. We have a plan for how we're going to deal with it. So you need to wait until we get out there and tell you how to deal with your birds. And so for 6 weeks, this farmer tells me he has to keep his birds alive. He has to feed his birds. So guess what's happening? The feed trucks are going in and out. And what are they doing as they go in and out his poultry farm and everyone else's poultry farm? Spreading disease. And for 6 weeks, he and his family are surrounded by dead and dying birds while he waits for a bureaucrat to show up from the USDA. And when they finally show up 6 weeks later, he said to me, and his spirit was almost broken, he said, Carly, I've been in poultry farming all my life. It has been my family's business for generations, and 6 bureaucrats showed up and they don't know anything about my business, and yet they told me what to do. Imagine how this man feels. This is his government, and this is his livelihood, and they are helping destroy it. See, that's the thing. When government gets so big, so powerful, so costly, so complicated, so corrupt, it isn't the big and the powerful and the wealthy and the well-connected that get hurt. It's the small and the powerless. Because, you know, if you're a big company, you can hire accountants and lawyers and lobbyists. If you're a wealthy, well-connected person, you can work the system. But if you're a small family-owned farmer, or you have a small family-owned business, you're getting crushed by the complexity. I'll tell you another little story from here in Iowa. I took a combine ride my last trip to Iowa. It was cool. It was awesome. Through a soybean field. right? Combines are really cool. And high-tech machinery. And so I'm riding through the soybean fields with this farmer, and he's explaining to me the technology in the combine, and on his screen, I don't know how many of you have ever been in a combine, but pretty high-tech computer screen, and on the screen, sort of superimposed on the straight rows of his soybean fields were these squiggly blue lines. And I said, what are those squiggly blue lines? He said, oh, those are waterways. I said, oh, are those the waterways that the EPA now controls 99% of here in the state of Iowa? The EPA now controls 99% of the water in Iowa and throughout the nation. And he said, yes. This farmer does not know what the rules are. He does not know what he needs to do to meet the rules or to break the rules. And I said to him, I'd like to see one of these waterways. And so we drove on the combine to a waterway that the EPA controls. And you know what it was? It was like a round, I don't know, maybe as big as these two, the diameter as big as this and those two rows. And it had green grass in it. That's a waterway. In other words, there was enough moisture somewhere in the ground that the grass was growing. But the EPA now controls that. When government gets this big, complicated, and powerful, what happens? The small and the powerless get crushed. Remember the financial crisis, the real estate meltdown? Remember that? And remember how Dodd-Frank was supposed to save us all? Well, let's just remember what actually happened. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government-sponsored entities, created the financial crisis because they were rolling out mortgages. And by the way, Republicans and Democrats alike thought that was a really good idea. And while Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are rolling out mortgages, 25 government agencies were supposed to be minding the store. And then the whole thing fell apart. And who got hurt? Not the big, powerful investors in loads of real estate, the small. The small got hurt. And so Congress passes a bill called Dodd-Frank, and it's supposed to protect us from Wall Street banks too big to fail. Well, here are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. 10 banks too big to fail have become 5 even bigger, even more powerful banks. And by the way, those same Wall Street banks helped write the bill. And meanwhile, 1,700 community banks have gone out of business. And why does that matter? Because community banks are like the Opportunity International of the small towns and communities across this nation. Community banks are where most families and most new and small businesses get their helping hand. And we are crushing them. The big get bigger, the powerful get more powerful, the wealthy and the well-connected get wealthier and better connected, and the small and the powerless get crushed. It is called crony capitalism, and it is alive and well. Now, you will hear some progressives say the answer to crony capitalism is more big government, but the truth is it is exactly the wrong formula. Because the more complicated and the more powerful government gets, the more true it is that only the wealthy can handle it. Only they can make that system work for them. And if you doubt that, think about, just as one example, think about what the Federal Reserve has done. Zero interest rate policy, right? It's been going on forever now, 6 years. It's supposedly helping our economy. Not really. Because for the first time in U.S. history, we have the lowest, we are destroying more small businesses than we're creating. That matters. Because small business, family-owned businesses and farms, community-based businesses and farms, new businesses, create 2/3 of the new jobs in this country and employ half the people. We are now destroying more of them than we are creating because they can't take the load of government. So our economy isn't growing, but who is benefited by a zero interest rate policy? Not college kids trying to save up. Not a young couple trying to save up for their new house. Not a retiree who's saving. No. Who is advantaged by that zero interest rate policy? People who are invested in the stock market. People who are invested in real estate, because that's the only place you can get a return. And in fact, while progressives will talk over and over about all the people they want to help, factually speaking, every group they claim to be helping has been harmed in the last 6 years. 4 million women and girls have fallen into poverty. African American youth unemployment is at record highs. We have the lowest labor participation rates by both men and women since the mid-70s. The bigger government gets, the more true it becomes that the small and the powerless get crushed. And we've been dealing with this for a really long time. In fact, it's been going on for decades. Decades. We talk about the same things every election cycle, but somehow they just never get fixed. We never secure the border. We never reform the tax code. The tax code, by the way, is now 73,000 pages long. And I'll tell you what, an individual or a small business owner cannot understand it anymore. If you're a big company, you can. If you're wealthy enough to be able to hire accountants, you can. But not if you're just somebody who needs to understand how to file your taxes. You can't. And meanwhile, it goes on and on. Here's the thing. The fact that we have been dealing with these festering problems for so long, the fact that government gets bigger and bigger and more powerful and more complicated year after year, regardless of which party's in office, the fact that 75% of our fellow American citizens think their own government is corrupt, reminds me of the difference between management and leadership. You see, managers are people who do the best they can within the existing system. They don't challenge the system. And because they don't challenge the system, they never really get around to solving festering problems. They just tinker around the edges of them. You all know managers. It's not that they're bad people. It's that they never really challenge a broken system. They just do the best they can within the system. Leaders are altogether different people. Leaders are people who know their job is to challenge the status quo. Because it is only by challenging the status quo that you can solve festering problems and produce results. I think this election is about leadership. And I'm running for the presidency of the United States because I think we need a different kind of leadership in the Oval Office. I think we need somebody who has a track record of challenging the status quo and solving problems and producing results, because I think that's what the American people demand now, whether they're Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. I think the American people are tired of dealing with an inept, corrupt government that lifts up the big and the powerful and crushes the small and the powerless. And so we can't keep doing what we've been doing, which is send people in from the professional political class, because they're part of the system. And you know, if you've become part of a system, you kind of don't see it for what it is anymore. You know, it's like fish swim in water. They don't know they're in water. That's what they've always been in. I've thought a lot about what's at stake in this election. You have to do that if you're going to run for president. What's at stake? So I think there are several things at stake. One of them I kind of figured out when a man came up to me in the summer of 2014. I had given a speech. He was a Democrat, actually. Before I gave the speech, he sat down next to me. He said, "We're not going to agree on anything." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "Well, you're a Republican. I'm a Democrat." I said, "Well, why don't you listen? Let's see." At the end of my speech, he came up and said, "Amen. I agreed with everything you said." And he said, "You know, Carly, we don't think of ourselves as a nation of limitless possibility anymore." And I thought how true that is and how sad that is, and that we must reverse. Because when we don't think of ourselves as a nation of limitless possibility anymore, we have lost the core of who we are. And we always used to know, we knew as Americans that if something were worth doing, we were going to go off and do it. And if something were hard to do, even better, we'd figure out how to do it. And we all knew, we knew, that our children and our grandchildren's possibilities were going to be greater than our own. But people do not know that anymore. And I believe that gives us a huge sense of disquiet. As I said, the possibilities for too many Americans and the potential of this great nation are being crushed by an out-of-control, unaccountable government and a political process that no longer serves the citizens. I believe ours was intended to be a citizen government, and I think we need a leader who will partner with the citizens of this great nation and take our government back. We have to hold this government accountable. We have to cut these bureaucracies down to size. And by the way, we have to get our economy going and growing again, because if we are not creating enough jobs, then too many people's lives are robbed of possibilities. And the only way to do that is to recognize where job creation really comes from. It isn't from the Federal Reserve, and it isn't from the big Wall Street banks. It is from and always has been from new, small, family-owned businesses and farms. Most people start out the way I do, in a little company, or the way my husband did, in a family-owned business. So when we crush them, we crush possibilities for too many people. I also think that we need to lead in the world, because this country, for all of our faults, and yes, we are not a perfect nation, but think about this. This is the only nation in the history of the world and on the face of the planet who, despite our unrivaled military superiority, has never used that strength to occupy territory. We have used it to liberate people. And that speaks to the character, the unique nature of this nation. And so we need to get this economy going and growing again. We need to hold this government accountable and cut it down to size, and we must lead again in the world. And that means we need to stand with our allies and confront our adversaries. Because when we do not stand with our allies, they lose courage and hope. And when we do not confront our adversaries, and we have many now, doesn't mean rushing off to war, but it does mean showing strength and resolve and leadership. When we do not confront our adversaries, they are emboldened. I think to win this election, we have to really explain to people what conservatism is and what progressivism is. So I want to tell you one last story before I wrap it up here and take your questions. Several months ago, I went on The View. I like Whoopi Goldberg. I don't agree with her politics, but I love her movies, so I was delighted to go on The View. And I was having a really nice conversation with Rosie Perez, who was kind of fascinated by the fact that I have met Vladimir Putin as well as so many other world leaders and had had a private meeting with him, and she wanted to know what he was like and what I would do. And so as we're having this conversation, she suddenly pauses, and she says, "You know, Carly, I like you. I'm not a Republican." I said, "Wow, Rosie, I'm shocked. I would never have guessed that." But then she asked the key question. She said, "Why are you?" And that's the question we have to answer to win this election. Here was my answer. Because I believe no one of us is any better than any other one of us, No one of us is any better than any other one of us. Each of us is gifted by God. All of us have the capacity to live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. And I believe our values and our principles and our policies work better to lift people up. I don't think progressives believe this. Their policies certainly don't believe it. I think progressives think some are smarter than others. Some are better than others.
All right, so we will dip out of that of Carly's town hall. It is coming up on noon, and we have some big news to talk about. We're just learning new details, including a possible Joe Biden run for the White House. That news is coming up in just a few minutes. Just let me get you situated right here. Is Joe Biden running? That is the question that a lot of people are talking about right now. I do have a story that I want to show you guys. 1 second. There we go. And then we're going to talk about some new revealing details.
On the Republican side, Donald Trump is continuing to take heat from his GOP rivals for partially blaming former President George W. Bush for the 9/11 terror attack. During an interview with Bloomberg, he said blame him or don't blame him, but he was president when the World Trade Center came down. Well, now Jeb Bush defending his brother on Twitter, saying, quote, "How pathetic for Donald Trump to criticize the president for 9/11. We were attacked and my brother kept us safe." Senator Lindsey Graham is demanding Trump apologize. He told Trump on Twitter, quote, "Suggesting George W. Bush is a loser because we were attacked shows that you don't understand this war." Even Carly Fiorina weighed in today when asked about it on the campaign trail.
You know, Donald Trump says a lot of, frankly, irresponsible things. And the rationale for his candidacy seems to be everyone else is stupid or messed up or a loser. And he's the only guy who's good.
So far today, Trump has not responded. Now on the Democratic side, the race hinges on the decision of one man, Joe Biden. But he's running out of time, something his own political team is now publicly acknowledging. In a letter to Biden's closest supporters, one of his top advisors says, quote, "If he decides to run, we will need each and every one of you yesterday." Meantime, his would-be primary opponent, Hillary Clinton, just announced that she has $33 million in the bank. She raised more than $28 million over the last 3 months. Bernie Sanders raised $26 million. That is a lot of money already spoken for from Democratic donors. So if Biden runs, he has some serious catching up to do. An announcement expected any day now. In Washington, Kristen Fisher, Fox News.
All right, and we do have new details that just came out. Let me read this for you. This is from Fox News' Ed Henry. Ed Henry is the chief White House correspondent for Fox News, and these are the new details. He says 3 sources close to the vice president telling me he's expected to announce he is running, but the sources are still urging caution on a 48-hour timeline. Ed Henry then also says the 3 sources say the vice president telling supporters in calls planning to jump in race but not rushing. Watch for a possible Saturday Jefferson-Jackson dinner. He's going to be in Iowa. Watch for that to be the day he announces that he will be running for president. So that is some big news that has just come down within the last minutes. I'm glad that I was able to share that update with you. That's what's so great about Fox 10 News Now, is we can get you that information right out there for you. So that is the very latest from Ed Henry, Fox News's chief White House correspondent. He also did have this to say. He says Fox has learned Secret Service has now moved forward on 24-hour protection of both Donald Trump and Ben Carson. That involves 260 agents. So now Donald Trump and Ben Carson will be getting Secret Service support as they head on in the campaign trails, as they are the number 1 and number 2 in the polls there on the GOP side. So lots of new details that just emerged within the last minutes. Once again, Ed Henry saying that there are sources saying Vice President is very close to making an announcement on running for president. We could even see a possible Saturday announcement when he has a dinner gala coming up on Saturday in Iowa. Should be very interesting as we continue to roll out and see what's happening. I do want to update you guys on the very latest stories. We've been talking about weather all day today. That's been one of the topics that everybody has been talking about, that and the Arizona Cardinals loss if you're a sports fan. I do want to also talk about, well, Chicago Cubs are 0-2 in the NLCS. They lost both games over the weekend to the New York Mets. And then on the flip side of that, Kansas City is up 2-0 against the Toronto Blue Jays in the ALCS. So it is getting very tight now in this October race for the World Series. Kansas City only 2 games away from another World Series appearance, and the Cubs are going to try to break a curse. Can they? Well, they got to win 4 games to do so, and they're in an 0-2 hole. Big game tomorrow for the Cubs. A huge game for the Cubs at home. They need to win that game because you do not want to go down 3-0 on a best of 7. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to get out of that. Remember Boston Red Sox? They were down 0-3 against the New York Yankees. They come back and win all 4 games and then go on to win the World Series, breaking their long curse. So anything is possible when we're talking about sports. But on the weather side, let's take a look at what we're dealing with right now. This is Fox Vision on our Fox 10, and we can see that we're tracking some rain here near Wickenburg, little cell here. So we'll be following it closely for you. And then this is the radar that we have for the 24-hour rain totals as that goes by, but not too much going on as far as radar is concerned. But then here are the 24-hour rain totals, and you can see just the valley got a good little good little rainfall yesterday, a lot of thunder and lightning. As I'm looking at the chat now, Robert saying Royals and Mets. That is who he is picking for the World Series. And if it ended right now, the ALC, yep, they would be playing. But we still got to play it out and see what could happen, see if there's any sports magic, if there's any more magic left for the Chicago Cubs. We will see. But as we continue to look at our Fox Vision radar right here, and you can see some cells popping up near Wickenburg and little action close to Yarnell. Do have some other stories that we want to get to you today. Including this one. We haven't talked about this one, but it's from California, a Navy SEAL female defense class. Let's take a look.
Situation you hope to never experience. A person breaking into your home, their intentions unknown. That's where this group of women come in, spending the day here at a former movie set in Kearney Mesa, now the site of SOST, also known as Strategic Operations Skills Training. These women are learning self-defense from former Navy SEALs.
I would say it's very intense, very real.
But if there was a dangerous situation, they also teach you how to use a gun for self-protection.
I will shoot you, I have a gun, get out!
The women are put in several scenarios. The first, a home invasion, their defense, a 9mm pistol. An intruder is seen looking for the person living at the home and confronting them, busting through a bedroom door. The man is given a choice, leave or get shot. The other scenario is getting attacked in a parking lot. You can see a man approach a woman here when she's not paying attention. She fights back and pulls out a gun, shooting him. Retired Master Chief Stephen Bailey says these are situations that can happen to anyone at any time.
So if your head's on a swivel, you're paying attention, you won't get caught in the bad scenario. And if you do get caught in that bad scenario, you have the power to defend yourself on your hip.
Bailey says for many of these women, they have never touched a gun, but now will be more aware and know what to do if their life was threatened.
I'm being here trained with a Glock 19 semi-automatic pistol, and in real-life simulations, hyper-realistic scenarios, and really learning so much.
I guess you could say we're brothers figuratively.
These 6 Boy Scouts, proud members of Weymouth's Troop 9, put their first aid merit badges to good use on Saturday.
It's nothing really big. We just tried to help out.
The boys, aged 12 to 17, were descending New Hampshire's Mount Monadnock during a troop campout when they discovered a hiker who'd fallen and sprained her ankle.
I grabbed a couple sticks just from the woods and used ace bandage, which some of the scouts had on them, and made her like a makeshift splint.
Then the grueling part, called the fireman's carry.
We linked arms together. She then sat down. Then we maneuvered around certain rocks.
5 hours and nearly 2 miles of tough terrain later, they arrived at the bottom. Their adult leader and Dr. Mike Jacklich says training paid off.
I was so proud of them. I mean, the splint was perfect.
Injured hiker Linda was taken to the hospital. On Sunday, she spoke to us by phone while recovering at home.
I said, you guys are my little angels, I swear, because I just felt so safe with them.
Her ER doctor says she could have suffered a fracture had it not been for her rescuers and their impressive work.
He couldn't believe it. He's like, who did your splint? I'm like, Boy Scouts, Troop number 9 from Weymouth.
But these boys aren't fazed by the praise. After all, a good deed is all in a day's work.
No matter what the situation, you're always helping out somebody that's in need.
All right, so that was a great little story on some Boy Scouts helping out the hikers, and you guys are still talking about in the chat room about the sports. Gotta love it. Got to love some sports talk there. I do want to take you to the full now. We'll show you the full White House briefing that happened a little bit earlier ago. On the flip side of that, Kinsey will be up here, so she's getting ready for her show right now, and I will see you guys back at 4 o'clock, but we will show you now the White House briefing where they cover a bunch of topics.
Yes, in some cases there is documented evidence that those were strategies that were predicated on a political benefit for Republicans. And that certainly runs counter to some of the basic and most important principles of our democracy.
And last question, so we should expect Justice to chime in on this or work on this?
You can check with the Justice Department and they can update you on their efforts if there are any in this matter. Okay. John.
Josh, when Britain got involved in the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the administration expressed concern. Are you concerned about the extent to which China seems to be investing in British kind of critical infrastructure, like our nuclear plants and the like?
Mm-hmm. Well, John, I'm not aware of any of those specific investments. Obviously, the United States has, ironically enough, some investments in nuclear facilities in China. And I know that's something that President Obama and President Xi had the opportunity to discuss when President Obama was in China just about a year or so ago. The other thing that President Obama made clear in the news conference that he did with President Pak on Friday is that the United States welcomes strong relations between our allies and China. After all, the United States, like the rest of the world, welcomes a rising China and a China that is ready to assume the obligations and responsibilities that go along with significant economic, political, and military strength. And so, obviously, whether it's, working with China to limit Iran's nuclear program or enlisting China's influence to try to get North Korea to live up to their international obligations. There are a variety of ways where China has started to use their influence to advance international priorities, and we would welcome the continuation of that trend.
If you would allow that sort of investment from China into the US, is it wise for such critical infrastructure to be built by the Chinese?
Well, there's obviously a process for the United States government, where appropriate, to weigh in on those decisions. I don't know what the process is in the UK, but that's obviously something that national security officials in the United Kingdom would have to determine for themselves. Okay, John.
Josh, I'm going to try where Julie failed a little while ago.
It
was a good effort.
Supposed to be friends up
but I'm going to try we're absolutely friends. He failed. Exactly. So you've been part of a presidential campaign. You know what it's like to launch a presidential campaign. You know the vice president. You work in the same building as the vice president. You see him on most days. Does he look like a guy that's about to announce his
That is a creative way to ask that question. I'm not going to stand here and assess the vice president's body language, but
what do you think? What's your sense?
Yeah.
You're there. You see him every day.
Yeah.
What's your sense?
Well, there's no denying that Vice President Biden is somebody who brings a lot of energy to his current job, and based on the fact that he has run for president twice before, I think should be a clear indication that he believes that he's got something to offer to that debate and to offer to the country. And I think that his strong performance as vice president has led a lot of people to think that he would be an influential candidate, an effective candidate in the presidential field. But ultimately, this is not the kind of decision that can be made for the vice president. The vice president himself needs to make this decision, and it's an intensely personal one, and it's something that he's obviously been considering not just over the last several months, but I think probably even longer. And when he's arrived at a decision, I'm confident it's one he'll announce.
So it looks like I might have failed there too. But do you share some of the frustration that we've heard from other Democrats, including people like David Axelrod, that this decision process has gone on so long?
I don't share that frustration. I think that anybody who has served this party and this country as long as the vice president has is entitled to all of the time and space that they need to make this personal decision. And I'm confident that once the vice president has reached a decision, that one way or the other, that he'll be prepared to announce it.
And do you expect that to be soon?
Well, again, as I observed yesterday, I think the laws of physics will require that this is a decision that be announced relatively soon, because the date of these contests is coming up. But for the precise date, that's something that only the Vice President knows. Okay. Major.
So I'll just say on top, I'm going to fail, John, but we're going to give it a go. This is a probing question, but it's serious because on two issues I can think of right off the top of my head, Iraq and any potential budget conversations that might go on. The Vice President has played a vital role for this President.
That is true.
And I wonder if, as he has considered what he may or may not do, if the President and he have discussed what it might mean to this administration if Joe Biden goes from being the Vice President who routinely was on the phone with all the principal players in Iraq on a regular basis, and in a previous time when the country was facing a fiscal cliff, he was the primary behind-the-scenes negotiator with Senator McConnell to work something out. Can this administration deal with those two issues if the Vice President on which it has relied in the past is now a presidential candidate and unavailable?
Well, Major, I think even the Vice President, if he were to make a decision to throw his hat into the ring, would recognize that he has critically important responsibilities as the Vice President of the United States. And these are responsibilities that he carried out in the midst of a hotly contested re-election campaign in 2011 and 2012. And while he certainly would be adding a lot of things to his plate if he were to decide to mount a presidential campaign, I'm confident that he would make time as necessary for the responsibilities that he currently has as Vice President.
Can you tell us what the basis of that confidence is?
Well, I think it's...
Is that a supposition, or do you know from the President that they've discussed this?
I don't know any of the details of what the President and the Vice President have discussed. I think the basis of this supposition is that this is something that Vice President Biden did in the context of the re-election in 2011 and 2012, and I'm confident that if necessary, he could do it again in 2015 and 2016.
You would concede that it's quite a different thing, though, to run for president as a candidate as opposed to run as the running mate for a president in a re-election campaign.
I would acknowledge that those are two different things. However, they are both endeavors that would require significant commitments of time when it comes to politics, but also an acknowledgement that governing responsibilities come first. And I would have no doubt about the Vice President's ability to make those decisions.
A governing Vice President first and a candidate second if you were to announce.
Well, he certainly would have some responsibilities that he's sworn to uphold, and I'm confident that he would do that regardless of whether or not he were pursuing his presidential aspirations.
On the other end of Capitol Hill, Republicans are trying to decide who the next speaker is going to be, and I wondered if you could, without prejudging or offering an opinion, because I know you don't want to do that, if you could describe what the President's relationship and working relationship has been with Paul Ryan.
Well,
they had a rather famous episode where the President gave a speech on the budget. Paul Ryan was in the front row. That didn't go so well. I wonder if anything has evolved from then, since then, and if you would just give a general description of either this White House's or this President's relationship with Paul Ryan.
Well, Major, I thought you were actually going to refer to an earlier exchange that President Obama and Congressman Ryan had early in the administration over budget issues. This is when the President traveled to Baltimore to meet with the House Republican Conference, and they do an annual meeting. They invited the President, and they had an opportunity to exchange. And I think at that point, the President was quite clear that he respects Paul Ryan, that he is somebody who obviously has spent a lot of time seriously thinking about some of the significant challenges facing the country. At the same time, the President has profound and occasionally vigorous disagreements with him on fiscal issues and presumably other things too. I think both of those incidents, I do think, sort of illustrate the kind of relationship. I'm sorry?
Has anything evolved since then?
Well, the only other issue that comes to mind that I know that Chairman Ryan was involved in trying to advance Trade Promotion Authority legislation. And that's an example where the administration was able to work effectively with a range of leading Republicans to pursue a legitimately bipartisan goal. And I know that certainly Chairman Ryan's support for that effort was welcomed by the White House. But we also got support from people like Leader McConnell and Speaker Boehner and a variety of other Republicans who are responsible for helping the administration build the kind of bipartisan coalition that was necessary to see that legislation pass.
President rooting for Paul Ryan to be the next leader.
The president doesn't have a rooting interest in this one. He's merely as an interested observer.
Well, related to that, does this administration, does the president believe it has to narrow its focus on what may be doable in the remaining days of this year legislatively because of the chaos that House Republicans are going through?
Well, I think, Major, there's been an acknowledgement, whether it's explicit or implicit, that the chaos that we saw in the Republican Party in Congress prior to Speaker Boehner's unexpected retirement was limiting the amount that Congress was able to get done. And look, this is an observation that we've seen a lot of Republicans make. And I saw that even Senator Cruz was on television yesterday observing that Republicans in Congress, despite the fact that they have strong majorities in both the House and the Senate, don't have much to show for those majorities. And that's been disappointing. There are some things, including the Trade Promotion Authority legislation, but that's been more the exception than the rule.
Right, but I mean, as you know, you're approaching some significant deadlines where a lot of things are going to have to be decided in short order. And to the degree you can share with us, do you still know who to call? I mean, do you have a relationship with a speaker that you believe is still carrying out the cloud and the ability and a chief of staff and underlying aid? I mean, is it business as usual or not so much?
Well, obviously,
if it's not business as usual, do you have to narrow your focus and really just try to prevent a couple of bad things from happening and not really imagine accomplishing much beyond that?
Yeah. Well, Major, I guess this is what I was alluding to, which is that we are in a place now, I think, where unfortunately the ambitions for congressional action are limited to just the essentials. And in this case, there's not a lot of discussion in the Republican Party, even in the context of a contested speaker's election, about the kind of ambitious agenda that Republicans are hoping to advance with their strong majorities in the House and Senate. There's no discussion of that. Right now, the only thing we're discussing is how to prevent another government shutdown, how to ensure that we're not risking the full faith and credit of the United States, how do we make sure that our basic national security priorities are properly funded. These are not ambitious proposals. These are the basic essentials that the American people expect of their Congress.
So there would constitute the basics.
Essentially, there might be a couple of other things I'd put on there. You know, the reauthorizing the XM Bank, making sure that we can fund our infrastructure through another transportation bill. There are a couple of other essentials in there, but not many. And certainly, and again, these are not the kinds of things that are the visions of transformational leaders. These are the responsibilities that every single Congress, since the very first one, has had to confront. And you know, when it comes to the debt limit, we've seen the previous Congresses have not been willing to risk the full faith and credit of the United States, and we're hopeful that this Congress will follow suit.
One last quick topic. The Pentagon says the memorandum of understanding with Russia is probably going to be released tomorrow. Over there, they don't want to call it an agreement because there's not an agreement between these two countries about what's happening. There's just a legal document that says, well, I guess we'll stay out of each other's way. How would you characterize what this actually is and what it represents, and how it fits in with anything that approximates a strategy between the two countries in Syria?
Yeah. Well, I don't have an update for you on the timing of that document. The Department of Defense can give you the best assessment, and it sounds like that may be their best assessment. This is the result of now 3 different conversations that have occurred between military officials on the United States side and their Russian counterparts. And we have described these kinds of consultations as practical, operational level discussions intended to deconflict their activities from ours. And this is the kind of thing that would ensure that Russian pilots are operating consistent with international safety regulations. This is ensuring that when pilots are operating, that they're using internationally recognized communications channels, that they're speaking English, so that we can avoid mishaps. But this does not at all rise to the level of any sort of strategic cooperation at all. The other data point that I would bring to your attention is that over the weekend, the Department of Defense announced that a military operation had succeeded in northwestern Syria that resulted in the death of Sanafi al-Nasser. This is the leader of an extremist organization with designs on carrying out attacks against the West, yes, the Khorasan group. I'll just note that this is an airstrike that was conducted in northwest Syria. And I think this is an indication that the United States will do what is necessary to ensure that our interests are protected and that our safety and security are protected. The reason that northwest Syria location is notable is because we know this is where the Russians are spending a lot of time and carrying out a lot of their military operations. But in this instance, the United States was able to successfully carry out this operation without any undue interference from the Russians.
Thanks.
Okay. Lala.
Two questions. What are your expectations from the later this week, President is meeting the Pakistani Prime Minister on Thursday?
The President is looking forward to welcoming the Pakistani Prime Minister to the White House later this week. Obviously, there are a range of issues that are important for us to discuss, including the announcement that the President made last week about our strategy in Afghanistan moving forward. We certainly have an important security relationship, and the security cooperation between our two countries is beneficial to the safety and security of the citizens in both our countries. And I'm confident that will be the focal point of discussions. But we'll have a little bit more that we can share as the meeting gets closer.
But you completely rule out a civil nuclear deal with Pakistan, or is there something talks going on that?
Well, last week I got asked about this, about the sort of reports that the United States and Pakistan were planning or that published reports indicated that there may be a breakthrough in this regard, and I would significantly reduce your expectations about that occurring on Thursday.
And secondly, in Afghanistan, the Taliban hit a F-16. Are you worried about the increasing capabilities of the Taliban in Afghanistan?
For questions about those kinds of questions, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense. I'm not aware of that specific report. Okay. All right. Kevin.
Thanks, Josh. On Friday, at least it's been reported that you pulled the plug on plans to sell oil and gas drilling rights in the Arctic. And I'm curious, I just read a quote from Kowski, Senator from Alaska. She said that decision is stunningly short-sighted and betrays the Interior Department to the state of Alaska. What's the mindset, especially given the need for energy security?
Well, Kevin, this is a decision that was largely made and announced by the Department of Interior. They're responsible for conducting those lease sales. And the conclusion that the Department of Interior reached is that given the given market conditions and given the broader state of the industry, that moving forward with those lease sales at this point was not the right decision. Obviously, I think the President has indicated, and the facts bear this out, a genuine commitment to energy independence, that the amount of oil and gas production in the United States under the leadership of President Obama is higher than it's ever been. But so is the amount of energy that we generate from renewable energy like wind and solar. And that's consistent with the strategy that the President has pursued, and it is one that has served our economy quite well.
I also spoke with another congressional member from that state who mentioned icebreakers and curiosity about whether or not more has been done or could be done to purchase more icebreakers for that part of the country. In particular, it has national security implications. What has the White House, what has the President planned and prepared to do to improve that, what, as it was put to me, a woefully insecure circumstance?
Well, Kevin, it's, you'll recall the President, when he traveled to Alaska earlier this year, just 6 weeks or so ago, announced that there are some additional ice-breaking assets that would be deployed to Alaska. These would have important national security consequences, but some important economic consequences as well. And so, investing in that kind of capability is important, and the President's indicated a willingness just as recently as 6 weeks ago to make that kind of investment.
And what's the latest on that? Has anything happened? Is there anything concrete that he can point to?
We'll see if we can get you an update on that. I haven't heard. We'll see if we can get you an update on that.
Okay, lastly, this is sort of broad stroke as approached by some of my colleagues here in the front row. Having been through this process, what are a couple things that someone might look at before making a determination to run for president? In the case of a vice president, in this case, who's run twice before, if there's a couple things that you say, if this happens, you go for it. If that happens, you probably go for it. What are a couple things that you think he might be considering?
Well, I'm confident that that the vice president and anybody else who's made a decision to run for office has asked that kind of a question to lots of people, and I'm sure there are a variety of opinions about that. I think the thing that I would observe is that there's one fundamental question that has to be answered before you can consider a whole range of other tactical questions, and the first is about your own desire and commitment to running the kind of campaign that we all know takes a significant personal toll. Life on the campaign trail is arduous, and it's a difficult challenge. And that's true of I have a little fun up here at the expense of some of the Republican candidates occasionally, but this is true of those candidates too. That they spend a lot of time away from their families. They spend a lot of time on the road and in cities that in which their day ends rather late and starts rather early, and that's difficult. And it's why it's important for a bunch of personal questions to be answered before you start considering a range of other things. I guess the other thing that I would say that I think is also important, and I do think that this is something that the vice president has considered as well, which is that those kinds of questions are far more important than questions about anybody else's campaign. That if you are making your decision about whether or not to get into a race based on your perception about somebody else's standing in the race, that's not likely to be a useful strategy. That if the reason that you're running is because you perceive that somebody else is not doing as well as they should, that's not a particularly effective rationale for voters, I think. That each candidate, that voters are going to expect that each candidate put forward their own rationale and demonstrate their own commitment to taking on the challenge of running for president. And I'm confident that's what the voters will expect of all of the candidates in this field, both Democrat and Republican. Okay, Chris.
Well, then, would you say among senior staff members who you've discussed this with, who obviously have worked closely with both of the key people involved, that there are strong feelings about whether or not Joe Biden should get into the race?
No, I don't think there are. I think those of us that are interested in politics, think these kinds of things are interesting. But ultimately, this is a decision that he'll have to make for himself. And
even to the extent that you and others have stated that obviously you feel strongly that a Democrat ought to get into the race because, or ought to win because you want to be him or her to be able to continue the policies that the president has put forward. Obviously, you want to set up the strongest possible candidacy, and there are no strong feelings about whether or not the entry of vice president would help or hurt that process? Well,
I suspect that everybody's got a theory, right? But ultimately, the most important question is not if you're a candidate that is considering running for office. The truth is, this is probably something that applies not just to the candidacy for president of the United States, but frankly for any political job. That you're making a commitment to serve your community and to serve the voters, and that's a serious commitment, and it's a significant one that requires a lot of your time and energy. And that's what has to drive your decision. The most effective public servants are the ones who acknowledge that these are personal decisions, that you can't be making, you can't sort of be trying to game the system, if you will, but that rather this is an important personal commitment that you're making. And Lord knows that Vice President Biden has made a profound commitment to this country and to the Democratic Party based on his decades of service to both. The personal question that he is facing now is whether or not to re-up that commitment. But that's a decision that he'll have to make.
The Benghazi testimony that Hillary Clinton is going to give this week, is there any sense that there is some legitimate fact-finding that can go on there, and how closely, given the seriousness of what happened with the incident and the loss of American lives, how closely will the White House be watching that testimony?
Well, obviously some Republicans have had some interesting things to say about this over the last couple of weeks. And they certainly have called into question the true motivation of the Benghazi Committee. And I think what that has done is that it has placed significant pressure on the Republican members of that committee to produce, to perform. My expectation is that those Republican members of the Benghazi Committee are going to come loaded for bear when Secretary Clinton is before them, because they're under a lot of pressure to produce. And thus far we haven't seen them produce much, so I think the pressure will really be on them to, frankly, to justify their own existence. And that very existence has been called into question by at least 2 Republican members of Congress, and we'll see if they are able to do that when Secretary Clinton is before the committee later this week.
And finally, on the emails, since we've had a weekend since this has all come out, does the president have any regrets that he told 60 Minutes that it didn't pose a national security problem, even the perception that there might have been an attempt to influence?
No. I think, as the president has made clear on so many occasions, and certainly as I've made clear even in response to this particular question, the president is deeply respectful of independent investigations that are ongoing into any matter, frankly. That there's a responsibility on the part of our law enforcement agencies to conduct investigations that are free from political interference. And his expectation is that the professionals of those organizations will do that. And certainly the FBI has a strong record of doing that. But the other thing I think, Chris, that's important that warrants mentioning here is that in the context of those investigations, we have seen a legitimate and even spirited debate about how and whether to classify certain portions of those emails. But even Secretary Clinton's harshest critics haven't come forward to suggest that the contents of those emails somehow endangered national security. We can have a debate about how and whether to properly classify some portions of those emails, but that is a far cry from questions about endangering national security. And I don't think that even Secretary Clinton's worst and most partisan critics have suggested that there is information in those emails, at least based on what we know now, that would endanger national security. Okay. Angela.
The Canadians are holding their national elections today, and the Liberal Party, based on polling, is expected to take control. The White House has consistently said the Keystone decision is under review at states. I'm expecting to hear that in a second.
Yeah.
But given the Canadian elections, how will that potentially affect the timing of a decision? Does it speed things up because now there's no election to influence if a decision is released? And then secondly on that, is the expectation of the Liberal Party that there will be a denial of the permit and that they would like to have that happen sooner rather than later, anything that would influence the decision here on our side of the border?
Well, Angela, for updates on the timing of a Keystone decision, I'd refer you to my colleagues at the State Department. As you know,
I'm sorry to interrupt Josh Earnest here and his White House briefing. I know we promised you that in full, but I'm going to take you to Joe Biden talking on climate change currently. We are anticipating his we have heard that he is going to inevitably announce that he's running for president, so we're going to cut live to this just in case. We don't want to miss that in case that happens. So I'm going to send you there now.
Strengthens our economy, creates jobs,
and forges game-changing partnerships. We know that this vice president has led, has done it all, is about the future, is about jobs in our economy. He is the person who we can rely on as we think about taking on this challenge, which will either create a future for our families and our children or create problems that we don't want to think about, although John Holdren certainly shared a bit of that. So please join me in thanking Vice President Biden for his leadership, for his vision, for his ability to always do the right thing for my children and potential future grandchildren, and for yours and future generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Vice President of the United States. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mindy. I'm the late Joe Biden. I just want you to know, as much as I love you, I've been in a meeting with the President on another matter for the last 2 hours, and it's hard to say, Mr. President, you're on your own. I'm leaving. Although he is on his own, he doesn't need me. But I came first and foremost to say thank you. And by the way, you are the indispensable partner, not government. You are. Businesses, corporate America is, our banking industry, our financial sector is, and I mean this sincerely. You all, absent your judgment that we have to act to have a sustainable energy source, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere at all. If you notice, until you all started to come on board, this was a very, very steep hill to climb. I use an expression all the time the President continues to joke with me about, because I have a tendency to quote my father and mother frequently. But the phrase he reminded me I've used probably in the last 7 years over 100 times in our meetings is reality has a way of intruding. Reality has a way of intruding. And, imagine the jobs that, and you do, but for the public to imagine the jobs that we can create. Imagine the savings for consumers and taxpayers we can generate. Imagine the fewer cases of premature deaths and heart attacks and childhood asthma. And imagine the idea that I may still be able to, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren may be able to still go down to Rehoboth Beach and it be anywhere near where it is now. And I'm not being facetious when I raise those issues. You know, the administration's climate plan, action plan, outlines how we can go about curbing pollution, ushering in a clean energy economy, making sure we lead the world, and we have to lead the world in tackling the most consequential issue of our time, climate change. And that's why we hosted this summer, to show that as we head to Paris, we are really close to a historic deal. Our most iconic businesses are stepping up at the time that's occurring. You know, as we announced earlier, now 81 companies have signed the American Business Act on Climate Pledge to address climate change and support a strong agreement in Paris. And by the way, I didn't host, but I spoke at the first such meeting. I think we had something like 16 companies that were here. It just keeps multiplying. You know, important companies operating in all 50 states, employing more than 9 million people. You all generate more than $3 trillion in annual revenue. Iconic brands like Coca-Cola, Facebook, Hershey, Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg's, Levi Strauss & Company, McDonald's, Nike, Starbucks, Target. I could go on, and I apologize for not mentioning some of your companies. But heading to Paris, we're showing the world that we have three assets that will allow us to seize this moment. One is we have a consensus among the American people, not the American political system, but the American people. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. And by the way, I think, given their druthers, the vast majority of our Republican friends know we're right. They really know. It's not a matter of. There was a phrase used by a presidential candidate when I was a young kid saying, "In your heart, you know I'm right." Well, in their heart, they know that there's gravity and climate change. Being a little facetious, but when you think about it, it's like denying gravity. But at any rate, but it's being denied for political reasons. And the denial is not a luxury for those of us responsible for governing and representing the best interests of our country. And that's why you all are so important, by the way, because a lot of the very interest groups that oppose, and by the way, we'd be lying to one another if we didn't acknowledge there's winners and losers as we make this transition. There are. We try to accommodate for that in our suggestions. For example, coal. There's a whole group of hard-working, decent, honorable people who built an entire culture for the last 150 years around coal. It's not just the salary, it's not just the coal mine, it's how you get married, how you get buried, what your social mores are, what churches you go to. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania, long since no longer a coal center. But there is an ethic about it. So it's not, so those of my liberal friends who just dismiss this notion that, well, it's just the way transitions occur, there are people who get hurt. There will be industries that get hurt. There are, and it matters. It matters. And we have an obligation to help them transition. But the bottom line here is that you're so important because you are the very source of the economic growth that a lot of our Republican friends is the one area we still have agreement among most Democrats and most Republicans, that you all matter. You matter to the growth of the country. You matter to employment. You matter. The second thing that's going on here is my friend Ernie Moniz has discussed. We have the most advanced scientific and technological skills in the world, and we are able to innovate and address these problems. And we already are innovated, amazing the reduction in costs, which I'll speak to a moment, in solar energy and wind and making it more competitive with coal. There's just so much out there. I spend an awful lot of time with Dr. Holdren's group because I think we have so many amazing opportunities we're just on the cusp of, from in the healthcare industry to the climate to imagine, by the way, what we could do if, I've been the leading guy on, and as a consequence, very controversial, on gun safety. The last time we passed any legislation dealing with guns was what I wrote. I wrote the proposals for the president. The American public agrees, but we're divided. We're divided badly. But imagine the technological capability that's within our grasp if we were to make a moonshot to say that we're going to develop a capacity that you could only pull the trigger of a gun that had your DNA, your fingerprint, that no one else could use that gun. You'd have no Second Amendment problems because no one's right to own a gun would be, in fact, impinged on, and it's within our power. We can do it now. It just costs hundreds and thousands of dollars. But it's within our power to. There's so many things out there. But the most important area is in the area of climate. And we have so much available to us if we make the proper investments. The third thing, we have an economic system that is ready to accommodate the shift to clean energy. Last year, is anyone from Goldman Sachs here? Last year, I spoke at Goldman Sachs North America Energy Conference, and I asked the question, and there were a group about twice the number of you guys, and I asked the question. I said, "What's the long play? What's the energy future here?" To state the obvious, I'm not an investment banker, otherwise I wouldn't be listed as the poorest man in the Congress. Nothing I'm proud of. I'm not proud of it. When I got sworn in as vice president of the Washington Post, as my wife is a professor, so you can Google it, said, "It's probable no man has assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden." I assume they were talking financial assets, but all kidding aside, but I told the audience of bankers and investors that I wouldn't go long on investments that lead to carbon pollution. I'd be betting on clean energy. And all of you have agreed. You're making a business judgment. You're not just making a moral judgment, a sound judgment for your children and grandchildren. You have stockholders you're responsible for. You're making a sound business judgment here. Companies are already pricing in the cost of carbon into business decisions. Many of you here, Google has started to price it a while ago at $30 a ton. Disney, $10 to $20 a ton. Procter & Gamble, its entire manufacturing base is going to wind power, which will reduce enormous amounts of CO2 emissions. But again, it gets down to the bottom line. What do you bet on long? Where do you go long here? And the thing that, again, I'm more excited about, I had a chance to speak to the solar industry and all those interested in it down in Southern California just a couple weeks ago. There were over 1,000 people there. And then I keynoted the U.S.-China meeting in L.A. hosted by the mayor. They were all good folks there, but they don't excite me as much as all of you because they already are in the deal. They're already in the deal, and they're in the deal because they have a financial interest, but also because they think it's a moral and a practical imperative we deal with climate change. But again, don't underestimate your power. Your power to make the case to the community at large that makes economic sense for your company and your stockholders to make the decisions you've made. The case that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's a moral issue, but it's also a national security issue. We don't talk about it enough. It's economic. It has the reality of, as I said, reality has a way of intruding. It's just hanging out there. In 1986, when I introduced the first Global Climate Protection Act, and just think about it, it's called the Global Climate Protection Act. No one had ever introduced in the Congress something to deal with climate change. It was the first piece of legislation in the Senate to limit global warming. And at that time, I pointed out that reality has a way of intruding. I just happened to have a very, very bright young man who was deeply involved in these issues, who his name was Mike McCabe, a brilliant guy. He was the assistant over at number 2 guy for a while at EPA after he left me. But everybody was the biggest yawner in the world. No one wanted to pay much attention. Understand him. It's not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm prescient or anything. I just happen to be concerned about this issue for a long time since I ran as a kid in 1972 for the Senate. It made me very popular in the state of DuPont to talk about the environment as the biggest issue. And DuPont's been a good citizen. But, reality has intruded. And since I introduced that legislation, we have 19 of the hottest years have occurred in the last 2 decades, hottest years in history. Last year was the hottest year on record around the world. And we're on track to break that record again this year. We're reaping the consequences of inaction. In California, the most severe drought in 1,200 years is getting worse, not better. In South Carolina, we've gotten more rain than they've ever received on record since 1880. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when we see superstorms like Sandy that will cause death and destruction and billions of dollars in loss. And as the Pentagon tells us, this is a national security issue. The Pentagon wrote a paper that's now about 7 years old saying that climate change is the threat multiplier. It will cause more wars. Those of you who are familiar with Darfur and all the carnage that occurred, that's about climate change. It's 2 peoples in 1 country fighting over arable land. It's consequential, and it will get worse. Imagine if the sea level rises even another foot, how many millions of people will be displaced, particularly in Southeast Asia. Imagine what will happen. You think the migration patterns coming out of Afghanistan and Syria are a problem now. You want to destabilize existing governments. Watch what happens when tens of millions of people and food security is at stake, and they are on the march. This is not Joe Biden. This is not some, quote, good government green guy out there, tying ribbons around oak trees. It's a simple proposition. This is the United States military, and they're already beginning to plan strategically the allocation of billions of dollars worth of assets in order to protect America's national interest. Look what happens in the Arctic. Access through the Arctic to U.S. waters in ways we've never contemplated before. This is gigantic. So we have a choice. As my friend, the President and Science Advisor, John Holdren, who always is uplifting, I'm sure he was with you. He didn't scare the hell out of you, I'm sure. He used the phrase, he said, we can mitigate, we can adapt, or for lack of adaptation and mitigation, we can suffer. Think about the new standard we use now, and we talk about the consequences of natural disasters. We no longer talk about, in terms of the aid we give to localities of the federal government that are in deep trouble, we no longer talk about building back to what was the circumstance before the storm. Can't do that anymore. We have to build back to a new standard, a much higher standard that anticipates the reality of the repetition of the very kind of superstorm or storm that caused the problem the last time. It's a hell of a lot more costly, but it's also recognition of the need to adapt. This is a deadly serious issue, and we have a deadly serious way to approach it. And that's what we've done since day one in this administration. In the Recovery Act, which I had the happy obligation of being able to administer, it was over $800 billion, and no one, it was said, I remember, you won't remember, when the President introduced it in the joint session, when he was announcing his budget, he said, and Joe will do it. Remember that commercial, like, Mikey will eat it, Joe will do it, Sheriff Joe, okay? Well, it was destined to be an absolute failure because everybody knew the government can't administer almost $1 trillion program and spend $1 trillion in 18 months and make it work. But the interesting thing is that every outside and inside study shows less than 0.2% of the $832 billion spent resulted in waste or fraud. Darrell Issa, not a Republican friend of mine, he's a friend. I don't consider Republicans enemies, they're friends. But even Darrell Issa has said, this is the way every government program should be administered. Not a joke. But the point was, in that process, we invested $90 billion in clean energy technology, the largest clean energy investment in history. Because we believe that although the government is not the answer, government can kickstart this. The government can bring a lot of money off the sidelines if it invests. For every dollar we invested in that act as related to infrastructure, $14 came off the sidelines. And that's government's role. It gets back to you. It's back to what you are encouraged to do if you believe there's a national consensus to move. It's done big things for solar and wind. The cost has been driven down, making it competitive with the dirtiest forms of energy, the burning of coal. Since we came to office, the cost of energy has been reduced by more than 60%. Now, some of it's not all as a consequence of us. There's a whole lot having to do, it's not Obama and Biden, there's a whole lot having to do with the access to significantly more gas and oil as a consequence of fracking and other means. So I'm not suggesting, but in terms of the clean energy side, now, clean energy and in terms of solar energy, it's now at an all-time low. When we took office, it cost 15.1 cents per kilowatt hour for solar energy. It's now 5.9 cents per kilowatt hour because we said we're invested. We're in the deal. That encouraged, and because we had tax credits to move it. And we pull people off the sidelines. And all the significant intellectual capacity your companies possess got in the game. Got in the game with the Department of Energy. And with our Sunshot initiative, we're working to reduce the cost of solar, which I announced on behalf of the administration about 2 months ago, or maybe a little less. We think we can reduce the cost of solar energy by 2020 by another 75%. And that's why we announced last month a $102 million program to get more companies and businesses and research universities working toward that goal. We've increased electric generation from solar 20-fold. It's now the fastest growing source of energy, enough to provide clean and reliable electricity for 4.6 million American homes. That's not nearly enough, but it's a hell of a lot more from where we were in the beginning. And one of the benefits of solar is that the industry is, some of you know, is creating jobs 10 times faster than the rest of the economy. Solar jobs have grown by 86% since we took office, now 174,000. That's more people that work in good paying jobs, by the way, not minimum wage jobs. And that's more people than work at Google, Apple, Twitter, Facebook combined. And I'm not suggesting they're not critical companies, they are. But in terms of employment, it's real. And it's expected by the end of the year there'll be 210,000 jobs. And the industry pumps nearly $18 billion a year into the economy. We triple electricity from wind, enough to power 16 million homes. Supports over 50,000 jobs. And if we make the right decisions, it could reach, the outside estimates are, it could reach 600,000 good paying jobs by 2050. We now generate wind power at 2.35 cents per kilowatt hours, cheaper than coal. We've instituted the Clean Power Plan, cutting emissions of our power sector, which make up a third of the U.S. carbon emissions. We're cutting emissions by 32% by 2030. I predict it will be even larger as technology and science outpace what is expected. The largest step the United States has ever taken to combat climate change. And we know that we can't move the energy future with the outdated policy of the past for over a century. Look, the reason we have tax expenditures is that we're trying to promote certain activities. And we have tax expenditures, meaning we don't collect a tax otherwise that would have been required to be paid, because we want to promote certain activities. And it makes sense. It makes sense. And over the century, we subsidized oil and gas companies to drill. It made sense because for every 10 or 20 wells sunk, you only came up with 1 or 2 gushers. It made a difference. And it was a rational thing to do. But today, can anybody argue that the oil and gas industry needs nearly a $5 billion a year tax credit? If you just took half of that, we could cover all the cost of renewable energy tax credits, and the rest could be used to reduce the deficit or let them have half of that as a tax credit. What are we doing? What are we doing? And by the way, I'm not one of these guys, you know, let's go after the rich and the powerful and they're the problem. They're not a problem. But everybody has to do their part, man. There's got to be some rationality to this process. So in every budget proposal since we took office, we've called for eliminating the fossil fuel subsidy. But our friends up on the Hill, even though some of the testimony from the industry itself said we don't need it, our friends insist on continuing it. And instead, talk about, you know, the idea that climate change is not real. Well, they show it. They don't think it's real because our friends in the other team passed budget that slashed the Energy Department's renewable energy budget by 40%. That's their proposal. The answer is to slash the existing research and development efforts by 40% at the Department of Energy, precisely at a time when we should be doing more research and engaging in more research and development. But here we are. Here we are. We're doing the exact opposite that we should do. We need more investment, not less investment. And it'd be different if our critics could point and say, well, the investment you made has, over the last 7 years, has not produced anything. It really hasn't altered anything. I remember in the beginning of the administration making a speech in the Recovery Act saying this will drive down considerably the cost of renewable energy. And it was, there he goes again, this fanciful notion. Well, you know, as my friend Alan Simpson, the former senator from Wyoming, Republican, a great guy and a great friend, he said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And so, you know, these severe cuts are exactly the wrong approach we should be taking right now. We should be investing more in research and development. And look, where we are is that this is a worldwide problem, and American leadership is vital. One thing I agree with our critics about is that, and the president does as well, that America has to lead. You know, we always hear this about in foreign policy, we have to lead, and we do have to lead. Usually it's in the context of every problem is a problem that is directed at us. Half the time we're not the target of whatever's going on. But we have to lead, and the place we can lead the best is, you know, there's a phrase that I've been using for some time that often gets quoted, is that we have to lead not just by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. It's amazing why the rest of the world repairs to us as much as they do and looks to us for leadership. It's the power of our example. And that's exactly what the president has done in using the bully pulpit of the presidency, making the case more clearly, and granted we have an advantage because things have gotten worse. Isn't that a bizarre thing to say? Things have gotten worse, so we get people's attention more rapidly. That's why President Xi and President Obama agreed to reduce carbon emissions in the world's two largest economies. No one thought President Xi would sign on to that. A 26 to 28% reduction in the U.S. below 2005 levels by 2025, and China will peak its emissions around 2030. We've learned a lot of lessons from Kyoto and Copenhagen. I have to admit I've been around for both, and we have learned a lot. And we're determined. We are determined, and we're encouraged that other countries are stepping up to the commitments that they are making to go to Paris. And they require elements that we can read whether or not they're really going to keep their commitments. Number one, they're making commitments that are transparent, that have accountability built in, and that ratchet up targets over time. In Paris, we have to we have to focus on the financial and technical support for low carbon development. Some countries are going to need assistance in this area, and it is in our overwhelming interest. If they cannot afford the transition, we, the major companies, the major countries, should be engaged. The agreement has to be durable and dynamic enough to adapt as the world begins to change and the economy begins to grow. But we're not going to be able to do this without two things. One, we have to start at home. We can do all the preaching about the problem around the world. If the president is not able to deliver the United States and us do our part in an ambitious way, then it doesn't matter much. We need ambitious goals to reduce carbon emissions here in the United States. Again, that's where you all come in. And two, we have to have a public-private partnerships as well as city-state-nation partnerships. And that's why we're working with China to help create those partnerships at all levels. Last month, as I said, I spoke out in L.A. to the U.S.-China Climate Leaders Summit in California, a wordy title. But what it did, it brought together the major municipalities in China, as well as major municipalities in the United States. Two of the participants in China, cities, generate more carbon output than Japan as an entire nation does, than Australia as an entire nation. Just two cities that participated. And the good news is that they are, speaking of reality intruding, there's two things even oligarchies, dictatorships, or less than democratic nations have to worry about. One is corruption, because even their most ardent supporters don't like their money being stolen. And two is people dying because they can't breathe or the water isn't pure. I really mean this. So what you've seen in China is these cities are setting more ambitious goals than even their government is setting. Their federal government, their national government. It's the one place where the national government in China has allowed cities to move beyond what the national goal is that's been set. And so we brought them all together. And we brought along provincial leaders of both countries to build partners. We brought in governors and mayors here in the United States. Because there's a lot of places in the United States that the governors, California always is an example, are prepared to go beyond what the national standard is. And prepared to say we can do more and demonstrate more can be done. Setting a standard. Los Angeles and Beijing, for example, are working together on low-carbon urban planning, research projects, technology exchanges. It's real. I mean, you know, when's the last time any of you have been in Beijing? You've been there in the last year? Raise your hand. You probably wore a mask somewhere along the line. Not a joke. Not a joke. I'm not being critical. It's just a fact. There's an overwhelming interest in doing something about it. And guess what? There's an overwhelming business interest for us as well as the moral imperative. Technology we develop, we can sell. At the front end, we can give some of it. In case you haven't noticed, remember when that typhoon knocked out Japanese nuclear industry for a while? And, you know, we used to always say to people in the United States, you know, what happens in China matters. They're building one new coal plant a month, and it's going to affect us. And people go, oh, yeah, you know, we'd always have the non-climate guys say, no, that doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden, a cement barge bigger than this room rolls up on the beach in Oregon. Well, if it can float a whole cement barge, people all of a sudden went, whoa, it matters what's happening in Asia in terms of the air I breathe. It matters what's happening in Asia in terms of my physical health. And so there is, but this, look, what we need this everywhere. City leaders working with federal and state governments. We need governments working with the private sector and nonprofits and the academic community. I see that happening here at EPA in terms of stormwater drainage and sewers and et cetera that impact on where you decide to place your companies. I noticed 100 years ago when I was a local official, when you decide to put a plant or facility in another community, beyond the tax breaks you may look for, what else do you look for? Is there a railhead? Is there enough water? Do I have access to a highway? Do I have a workforce capacity that is able to meet my needs? These are things that happen that are just driven by the reality. One of those realities, and it is a real reality, is the long-term impact of climate change. Look, you're letting a secret out in a way that I can't, no matter how many speeches I make, no matter how many places I go, and that is that clean energy is the long play. Clean energy is a long play. Number one, it starts a virtuous cycle. It'll replace more good-paying jobs than will be lost. It will, in fact, fundamentally alter the environment in which people want to do business. It will fundamentally change the way in which we calculate everything in terms of cost of doing business. And what you're doing, and I'll end where I began, and I'm not being solicitous, is more important than anything the government can do ultimately. The free enterprise system is the vehicle that has made this country. It is the thing from which we grow, and we have the greatest, most agile venture capitalists in the world to allocate capital as well. And you're making just sound decisions that happen to have a profound moral and a profound economic impact on this country. So the real reality that's now intruding is you. You have more impact on the nature of this debate going forward over the next 5 to 10 years than any other part of the economy. You. And I can't thank you enough for stepping up. It's always good. I used to have a friend named Lawton Chiles. Remember Lawton Chiles? He was a senator from Florida. I got here in 1972, I was 29 years old, and Lawton had gotten elected in 70 by walking the length and then the width of his state. And his nickname was Walkin' Lawton. And he was one of the most insightful political minds that I knew. And I had been there about 5 months, and I sat next to him because I was very junior in the back row. And there was a little amendment that passed, and he really was excited about it. And I turned to him thinking, well, I don't fully understand the system yet. I didn't know what was so impressive about that amendment. I said, Lawton, what am I missing here? He said, Joe, with a southern accent, he said, Joe, he said, what I'm cheering for, he said, it's amazing when conscience and convenience cross paths in public life. Well, if Lawton were here, he'd talk about this as conscience and convenience. It makes overwhelming sense to do what you're doing, and I can't thank you enough for recognizing it as rapidly as you have. And hopefully, the next time we have this meeting, we'll have to have another room. I mean this sincerely, we'll continue to double the number of major corporations in America that are making clear to those voices that know better, but in fact are saying the wrong things, that it's overwhelming their interests as well, because it's good for business, it's good for the public health, it's good for jobs, it's good across the board. So I thank you for your commitment, and with that, I'll get out of your hair. Thank you very, very much.
Hi, all. I'm just going to jump in now that Biden is over and give you my top 5 stories of the day. Number 1 is sources are saying that Joe Biden is considering running for president. Let me show you Ed Henry's Twitter feed right here. Hopefully it'll fit in here. You can see here Ed Henry has been tweeting today in regards to this. He says, he says 3 sources close to Joe Biden telling me he's expecting to announce he is running, but the sources are all urging caution on 48-hour timeline. The 3 sources say at VP Joe Biden telling supporters in calls planning to jump in race but not rushing, watch Saturday Jefferson-Jackson dinner in Iowa. So that's interesting. I think that's one of the most interesting stories of the day for sure. Number 2, the feds to require drone registration. The Obama administration in a bid to start tracking personal drones and address safety concerns in advance of a holiday season when the industry projects thousands more will be sold. Announced on Monday, it will require the registration of drone aircrafts, even for consumers and hobbyists. The decision is meant in part to address the growing number of reported close calls and incidents that pose safety risks. Pilot sightings of drones have doubled since last year, including sightings near planes and major sporting events. Federal Aviation Administration Chief Michael Herta said registration will increase pressure on operators to fly responsibly, adding there will be consequences consequences when they don't, which is very interesting. And I guess it's really the only way to deal with something like that. It's really the only way to deal with drones showing up at the Super Bowl uninvited, or planes saying drones in their airspace when they're trying to get land safety or something. My next story, Kerry calls for end to senseless violence in Israel. Secretary of State John Kerry called for a halt in what he described as senseless violence in Israel and the West Bank, while also rejecting calls for an international presence at the Jerusalem holy site at the center of the escalating tension. We don't contemplate any change, but nor does Israel, Kerry told reporters at a news conference in Madrid. Israel understands the importance of that status quo. What is important is to make sure everybody understands what that means. We are not seeking some new change. We are not seeking outsiders or others to come in, said John Kerry. Here is a really, really upsetting story out of Florida. A body found in a Florida freezer may be missing girl. Police are investigating. Goodbye. I'll miss you. I shop there too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Religiously, yes. I'm on air.
Are you broadcasting now?
I'm broadcasting.
Oh, okay. I can't see anything.
Until tomorrow, and then you can. Thank you so much. I love Rick. Let's go back to this story. Police are investigating whether the body found in a freezer at a Florida home over the weekend could be a young girl who disappeared more than a year ago. And I have her picture, so let me show you this. This is sick. Oh my gosh, I hate this. So yes, the grandmother and aunt of Janlyn Thomas alerted authorities when Janya's mother, Janya Thomas, alerted authorities when Janya's mother and an unidentified man reportedly left a 5x4 freezer in their Bradenton, Florida garage last week and asked them to keep it for a little bit. Janya, 11, hasn't been seen since August of 2014, according to Child Protective Custody and the Bradenton Herald reported. Investigators were grateful to the woman for reporting the suspicious freezer and are trying to determine whether the body found inside is Janya. They thought it was a little odd because the freezer was padlocked, explained Bradenton Police Lieutenant James Rackey to Fox 13 in Tampa Bay Monday. Being smart, they actually broke open the lock and looked in the freezer and saw the body of a small black female in the freezer and called us. Thank God they called us. This is a horrifying story. According to reports, the child had been homeschooled since 2013 because she had some sort of medical condition that the lieutenant couldn't remember the name of, but apparently she shared it with her father, who's now deceased, where she could not control when she went to the restroom. So she had to be homeschooled. Apparently it was really inconvenient to her mother, and they suspect that that's why the mother murdered the baby, allegedly. And then the mother's got a rap sheet. She's been arrested for prostitution. It's just a horrible, horrible, horrible story. But can you imagine? And every time the grandmother and the aunt and everything would ask where the baby was, the mother would always come up with a different excuse. So can you imagine the grandmother's horror when she has a freezer dropped off at her house, opens up the freezer and thinks that baby's inside of it? I can't. A horrible, horrible, horrible story. But I have to say the next one equals in terror. Deadly shooting at a zombie festival. Fort Myers police released a description of a suspect in the deadly shooting at a zombie festival and said Monday they had heavily scrutinized a bystander's video showing ghoulish-dressed revelers screaming and running in every direction after 4 gunshots rang out. No arrests have been made, and police have not released a motive in Saturday's shooting, which killed 1 person and wounded 5 others. The chaotic scene sent throngs of crowdgoers pouring through the streets. The shooting happened around 11:45 p.m., just 15 minutes before the event officially ended. Large crowds were still in downtown Fort Myers, and authorities quickly cleared out nearby bars and set up crime scene tape where others patrolled the area with rifles searching for a suspect. The Fort Myers Police Department would like to thank the many tipsters who are providing information as we vigorously work to solve the heinous crime. Please keep the tips coming in as they are invaluable, the department said in a statement. Authorities said the shooter is a white or possibly Hispanic man in his late teens or early 20s. He was dressed in a black t-shirt and wore a flat-billed black and red ball cap. He was spotted firing a black semi-automatic handgun. Now, the deceased victim's girlfriend told a local newspaper that they had been at the festival for about 45 minutes. They were standing in line for a drink and hit the ground with everyone else when they heard the shots. When everyone raised their heads a few minutes later, her boyfriend was motionless, still wearing his creepy clown mask. The annual festival has been expected to draw more than 20,000 fans dressed as zombies. A statement on the ZombieCon Facebook page said organizers were saddened by the news, and the group takes the safety of its patrons very seriously. ZombieCon has been a popular event for nearly a decade, but some local residents and business owners have not welcomed the crowd of costume revelers in the street dressed as limping, bloated, degrading corpses. One restaurant posted signs warning visitors that ZombieCon participants were not welcome. Quarantined, no zombies allowed, the sign read. Several members of religious groups also picketed the event this weekend. Mayor Randall P. Henderson Jr. said the shooting would speed up plans to install security cameras throughout downtown. The ZombieCon shooting is the latest of several shootings, which the mayor said are difficult to prevent because they are often random and late at night. Yet he said the cameras would make it easier to catch criminals quickly. Sadly, we're moving in that direction. We need to be way more vigilant to keep citizens safe, he said. I can't even believe that that's an actual story that I'm bringing you, because it is, Halloween is supposed to be, full of spirit. It's really supposed to be about children and encouraging children to be creative and have fun and be playful. And what a horrific experience for all of these people. I'm beyond sure that they're traumatized for the rest of their lives. The little girl whose boyfriend murdered at the event, and everybody looking up when they felt like things were calm or trying to determine what their next move was going to be, and her boyfriend is motionless next to her still in his Halloween mask. Horrible, horrible. Rachel says that that would be an odd sight to see people with rifles dressed as zombies looking for a non-zombie shooter. Body found in freezer, says Rachel. So sad. Only in Florida we get insanely bizarre stories. Not only in Florida, but it does seem like in Florida we get a lot of stories about babies that are murdered by their parents. And it is really sad that this little girl was sick and that she was likely an inconvenience to her mother, and that's why this happened to her. Deadly shooting at a zombie festival sounds like an episode of Castle, says Les. Well, I prefer to say Bones since that's on our network, Les, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Well, and I'm looking forward to Joe Biden announcing whether he is or is not going to run, because I did feel like the Democratic debate was kind of a hug fest between friends. Also, I forgot to mention that Oprah Winfrey I think she purchased stock in Weight Watchers and is now on the board, and now everyone loves Weight Watchers. I'm a Jenny Craig person myself, preferably. No big deal. It's where I've had my success. I need to get back on it immediately. But hopefully Joe Biden announces within the next week. We will bring that to you live if that's the case, because that's what we do here on Fox 10 News Now. The requirement of drone registration, I'm all for it. I think that that's a good idea, especially when it comes to drones interfering with aircrafts. Kerry calling to end the senseless violence in Israel, I'm all about that. But keep in mind, just last week, they said, contradictory things about how Israel was acting aggressively. So that's interesting that now he's saying senseless violence in Israel. Also, though, that he wants to keep other parties out. We're not seeking outsiders or others to come in. And then the deadly shooting. Oh, the missing body of the girl. I'm done. I can't even with that story. We don't know if it's her yet, though. We have to wait and see. And then deadly shooting at Zombie Festival. It sounds like the plot to a TV show. Let me see here. Hi. Oh, why are you giving me that look? Rachel's concerned that you're on lunch. Rachel thinks you're on lunch. I said that no, you were gone. That you just picked up and left. When Biden wouldn't announce, you just said, I'm done. I don't have the patience for this.
Yeah.
We are anticipating our afternoon meeting where we're going to get a rundown of the stories that we're going to bring you during the 5, 6, 9, and 10 hour. And I'll have a better idea of some of the local stories I'll be able to bring you later tonight. I look forward to that. Rachel, he just left, but I'll tell him you said hi. Again, I think what I just did was kind of tell him you said hi. But these are my top stories at 1:30, basically. And now I'm going to let you go because I need to run into my afternoon editorial meeting to get a better idea of what's coming up for you this afternoon and this evening. This is the stream. This is the correct live stream. I'm going to shut it down right now. However, I will be back at 2:30. That's 1 hour from now. I will be back to give you the afternoon show, a better idea of what some of our local reporters are working on. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for spending your morning with Mike and I.